Chapter 3065 Illegitimate Son? Chapter 3065 Illegitimate Son? 3065 Illegitimate Son? Even Ling Han was slightly surprised. This woman could actually act so shamelessly? Was it really necessary to stoop so low in order to ride on a celestial king's coattail? However, he didn't lose his temper, and he simply observed the situation quietly. If Wang Chuanhe showed indecisiveness, and if he showed this kind of woman undeserved sympathy, then Ling Han wouldn't have the time nor effort to give this descendant much help. He would simply help him get to the 9th heaven before letting him be. Li Jingqiu! The members of the Li clan roared. They were filled with fury. They could understand the fact that she wanted to live. However, she couldn't push all the blame onto them. Kill them, Chuanhe! Kill them! Li Jingqiu shouted. A sinister expression flashed across her pretty face, ruining her beauty. There was savageness on her face as she yelled. Kill them all, and then I'll be able to leave with you. We can live together and care for each other forever. She put on a pitiful expression, and continued. Chuanhe, didn't you always want to marry me? I'll accept your proposal today. Wang Chuanhe remained silent. After a while, he shook his head and said, Do you take me for a 3-year-old child? Or perhaps you think I'm still the foolish youth from 3 years ago? He paused for a moment before spitting with soaring killing intent. I've come here to exact revenge today. Those who have the blood of my Wang clan on their hands don't even think of escaping. Li Jingqiu, as one of the main culprits, even dying 100 times is not enough to repent for your sins. Li Jingqiu's imposing aura instantly deflated like a balloon. She didn't dare to challenge the furious Wang Chuanhe, and she could only put on an even more pitiful expression as she said, Wang Chuanhe, just forgive me once, okay? I'll definitely serve you well in the future. Revolting. Wang Chuanhe said coldly. Shua, shua, shua. With a few swings of his blade, Li Bing was immediately cut into a dozen pieces. Those at the Eternal River Tier had powerful life forces, so Li Bing didn't die right away even though he had been reduced to such a miserable state. The severed pieces of his body continued to squirm, and it was as if they were worms wriggling on the ground. This was a bloody and terrifying scene. Wang Chuanhe lashed out again, grabbing another member of the Li clan, and asking in a baleful voice, How many members of the Wang clan did you kill? The person in his hand was so terrified that he directly suffered a mental breakdown, with his eyes rolling into his head and a warm liquid running down his legs. I won't grant you such an easy death. Wang Chuanhe sneered as he restricted the person's cultivation and tossed them aside. Run! The clan leader of the Li clan shouted. Everyone, go in different directions. Even though this ungrateful brat is extremely powerful, there's only one of him, after all. He won't be able to catch us all. The members of the Li clan immediately started to flee in different directions. However, they quickly discovered that they couldn't run out of this hall no matter what. Meanwhile, those outside the hall couldn't run outside the courtyard, and those outside the courtyard couldn't run out of the town. What in the world was going on? Was this also that ungrateful brat Wang Chuanhe's doing? Wang Chuanhe turned to Prince Ma Xian and clasped his hands in respect, saying, Thank you for the help, Lord. Indeed, he wasn't powerful enough to unleash such an ability yet. However, celestial kings could use such abilities with ease. Prince Ma Xian nodded with a smile and said, It's no trouble at all. They were done for, they were truly done for. Even a celestial king had become involved, so not even a dog from the Li clan would be able to make it out of this place alive today. Otherwise, that would be a great humiliation for the celestial king involved. Thus, the Li clan was definitely beyond saving. They were as dead as could be. Wang Chuanhe resolutely lashed out, killing anyone who had participated in the battle 3 years ago. He would cut them into as many pieces as the number of people they had killed. This was genuinely cruel and merciless. He started killing the more unimportant members of the Li clan first, and it was only natural that he would leave the clan leader and Li Jingqiu for the last. Only this way could he maximize the elation he felt from exacting revenge. Ling Han shook his head slightly upon seeing this. He had never experienced the excruciating pain of having his clan massacred before. Even though the Wang clan was descended from his bloodline, they were already many generations down, and he had never met them before either. Thus, even though he felt furious, he couldn't feel anywhere near as wrathful as Wang Chuanhe. To Ling Han, these people were his descendants in name only. To Wang Chuanhe, however, these people were his family who he lived with and cared about, so how could their feelings be compared? Ling Han could understand Wang Chuanhe's thirst for revenge. However, he still felt like Wang Chuanhe was taking things a little too far. Perhaps there had always been a beast hidden in this young man's heart, and following the destruction of the Wang clan, this beast was finally set free and allowed to engulf Wang Chuanhe's true nature. Or perhaps this was his nature to begin with. Ling Han decided that he had to give his descendant a few lessons. Otherwise, this brat would eventually go mad one day. Inside the hall, all of the members of the Li clan had already collapsed to the ground, helpless and in despair. Faced with such a situation, what else could they do but wait for death? Only Li Jingqiu remained stubborn and unwilling to give up. She stood there and spoke by herself, recounting all of her encounters and interactions with Wang Chuanhe, attempting to sway him. Wang! A powerful aura suddenly crashed over, directly shattering the defensive barrier that Prince Ma Xian had erected. Immediately afterward, a person abruptly appeared in the hall. However, one's surprise would immediately turn into understanding when they saw the two ribbons of iridescent light around his body. It was only natural that he could enter with such ease. Because he was a second heaven celestial king. The celestial king clasped his hands and greeted. Brother Ma! Prince Ma Xian also looked over. He furrowed his brows slightly, and asked in an uncertain voice. Brother Su? The Red Flame sect leader Su Fei? That's right, the second heaven celestial king said with a loud laugh. Prince Ma Xian's heart skipped a beat. However, his expression remained calm as he asked. For what purpose has Brother Su come? Come on, Brother Ma, this is quite cold of you, Su Fei said with a shake of his head. What did you just do to an elder from my sect? Did you forget already? A glimmer of hope appeared in the eyes of the collapsed members of the Li clan. In fact, even Li Jingqiu shut her mouth and stopped speaking. The situation was potentially changing. Oh, won't you look at my terrible memory, Prince Ma Xian said with a chuckle. So that's what Brother Su has come for. However, I don't recall ever wounding an elder from your esteemed sect. Indeed, Su Fei replied with a nod. However, Elder Luo's grandson died a miserable death because of this. As the sect leader of the Red Flame sect, it naturally wouldn't make sense for me to ignore this. Brother Ma, please hand the culprit over. I'll invite you over for a drink in a few days, and we can chat to our heart's content then. Prince Ma Xian spread his hands and said, Culprit? What culprit? I don't know what you're talking about. Him. It's him. The members of the Li clan surprisingly started to roar. They all pointed at Wang Chuanhe. This was their only sliver of hope right now, so they were willing to ignore even the threat from Prince Ma Xian. Li Jingqiu took things even further, sobbing. Lord Celestial King, I just got married to Luo Guang, yet after laying eyes on my beauty, this depraved beast actually dared to unleash violence on my wedding day. Please deliver justice, Lord Celestial King! Tears streamed down her face, and she appeared as delicate and pitiable as could be. However, would Su Fei be moved because of this? Thinking so would be looking down on celestial kings. Meanwhile, Prince Ma Xian frowned at what he saw. He hadn't imagined that these people would be able to muster such courage when granted a sliver of hope. They actually dared to utter such words before him. There was a faint smile on Su Fei's face as he quietly looked at Prince Ma Xian. Prince Ma Xian contemplated things for a moment before saying, This young man is of great importance, so it's best that Brother Su stays out of this. Oh? Perhaps he's Brother Ma's illegitimate son then? Su Fei chuckled. Chapter 3066 Manifesting Spiritual Qi. Chapter 3066 Manifesting Spiritual Qi. 3066 Manifesting Spiritual Qi. Pa! Su Fei was immediately slapped across the face. This was a crisp and loud slap that immediately caused the color to drain from his face. This was naturally a painful slap. More important than this, however, was the fact that he didn't even know who had slapped him. Just thinking about this caused a cold chill to run down his spine. Which lord has come? Please forgive me for not welcoming you, Su Fei said. He didn't dare to shout in anger, and he instead lowered his voice in a subservient manner. Prince Ma Xian's heart jolted in shock as well. Perhaps it's him, he thought to himself. This slap was to punish your toxic tongue. Do you have any complaints? Ling Han asked. Ling Han initially didn't want to interfere. However, who told Su Fei to accuse Wang Qianhe of being Prince Ma Xian's illegitimate son? To carelessly change someone's ancestry like this. Was this not asking for a slap? Su Fei felt like crying at this moment. He had merely said this in jest, yet he had somehow managed to draw great calamity upon himself. He wailed in grief in his mind, yet he didn't dare to let his emotions show on his face. Instead, his expression became solemn as he said, "Yes, you were correct to punish me. I'll definitely keep this lesson in mind." "All right, off you go then," Ling Han said. However, Su Fei wasn't willing to give up so easily. "Lord, may I have the honor of seeing your appearance?" "Pa!" He was immediately slapped across the face again. Prince Ma Xian chuckled coldly when he saw this. Even though he couldn't see Ling Han, either, he had already guessed the identity of this mysterious person. Just how freakishly powerful is Ling Han? Him speaking to you is already giving you enough face, yet you still want him to show himself? He said in his mind. What a joke. He's a heavenly venerate. Su Fei finally gave up all thought of resistance after suffering this blow. He had already been prepared this time, yet he had still been mysteriously slapped by that person. It was abundantly clear that the person was more powerful than him, far more powerful than him. He couldn't provoke this person. He bowed to the sky before turning around to leave. He would leave this troubled place forever and never return again. Wang Qianhe also retracted his gaze. He knew that the mysterious person was definitely Ling Han. After all, only Ling Han was capable of wielding such magnificent power. He continued to slaughter the members of the Li clan, interrogating them before hacking them into pieces. When he came across those who hadn't participated in the battle at that time, he would simply cripple their cultivation before tossing them aside. He would spare their life. Yet in this world, was this not the same as being killed? Ungrateful brat, your cruelty today will destine you to death by someone else's hand one day, the clan leader of the Li clan roared. At this moment, only he and Li Jingqiu were still alive. You need to die 100 times, Wang Qianhe said coldly. He started to carefully dice the clan leader into small pieces. Even Prince Ma Xian couldn't help but find this cruel. Killing someone was as simple as separating their head from their body. Wang Qianhe was taking things too far. However, Ling Han was nearby, so how would he dare to interfere? Li Jingqiu wet herself in fright, with her pretty face becoming deathly pale. The clan leader suffered a truly agonizing fate, with his body diced into 100 pieces, not one piece more, and not one piece less. However, his cultivation meant that he wouldn't die straight away, and he could only suffer in unbearable pain as his blood flowed across the ground. This was a truly horrifying sight. Prince Ma Xian had already turned his head around to avoid looking at this. If Ling Han weren't present, he would leave even if didn't stop Wang Qianhe. Now, however, he could only tolerate his disgust as he stood there. In reality, even Ling Han was frowning slightly as he observed the situation. Perhaps he had genuinely raised a demon? After the clan leader of the Li clan drew his final breath, Wang Qianhe turned around to look at Li Jingqiu. Don't kill me! Don't kill me! Li Jingqiu shrieked as she prostrated on the ground and furiously kowtowed. Her hair disheveled and she looked much like a lunatic as she begged. Qianhe, I'm willing to do anything for you. I don't ask to be your wife, and I can even be your maid or woman. Pooh! She immediately fell silent. This was because a sword had directly pierced through her mind. Wang Qianhe sheathed his blade, a complicated expression on his face. He had already exacted revenge, so why wasn't he feeling any joy at all? "Let's go," Ling Han said as he walked over. He grabbed Wang Qianhe and directly opened a fissure in the void, stepping in and traveling through the dimensions. "Respectful farewell, my lord," Prince Ma Xian said respectfully the moment before the spatial fissure closed. Only heavenly venerates were capable of opening fissures in the void. Those below the heavenly venerable tier could only open fissures in space, but not fissures in the barriers around the dimensions. Several months later, Ling Han returned to the profound negative realm with Wang Qianhe. Here, he truthfully explained the origins of the Wang clan to him. "Greetings, old ancestor," Wang Qianhe said as he fell to his knees. He respectfully bowed and paid his respects to Ling Han. Ling Han sighed and asked, "Do you blame me?" "I wouldn't dare," Wang Qianhe replied, with his head still lowered. He said that he didn't dare, not that he didn't. Ling Han waved his hand and said, "From today onward, you can change your name to Ling Qianhe. Ancestor, without the blessing of my parents, Qianhe wouldn't dare to change his surname." Wang Qianhe was unexpectedly stubborn. The knot in his heart was extremely tight. Ling Han thought for a moment before saying, "All right, suit yourself then." He couldn't continue to spend time and effort on this descendant forever. After returning to the ancestral grounds of the Ling clan, he would ask Ling Jianxue to deal with this matter. Meanwhile, he would enter seclusion. He had obtained another secret code of life, and he still had yet to fully digest it. This time, he spent a lengthy 300 million years in seclusion. Tiny wisps of spiritual qi appeared on each of Ling Han's dimensions. Spiritual qi. This was the foundation of cultivation and the root of cultivator's power. There were some powerful beings who would be at the celestial king tier the moment that they were born. Thus, they could skip the process of refining spiritual qi and directly start accumulating source power. To most beings, however, spiritual qi was the foundation of their cultivation. A look of delight appeared on Ling Han's face. The manifestation of spiritual qi in his dimensions meant that they would instantly start to advance several times quicker than before. He performed some calculations, and he found that he only needed around 10 billion years to elevate all of his dimensions into high-tier high-level dimensions. This was simply astounding. At that time, he would perhaps be powerful enough to rival, or even suppress Hysteria. Moreover, he would only be at the 6th tier. Being able to suppress Hysteria, the most powerful enemy, and the most powerful being in the world while only at the 6th tier. Who could believe this? The secret code of life can be viewed as the key to opening the door to the 8th type of power. This secret code also has a strong affinity with the power of dimension, so after obtaining it, I've technically already advanced to the 7th tier. It's just that I haven't actually obtained the 6th fundamental particle yet. 10 billion years. Give me another 10 billion years, and Hysteria will no longer be able to act with such wantonness. Even if Ling Han still couldn't kill Hysteria at that time, he would at least be able to suppress it comprehensively. He could then slowly cultivate to the 7th tier. When he succeeded, could anyone still remain undying and indestructible before him? But where did this spiritual qi come from? Ling Han was extremely curious. All forms of power had to come from somewhere, and they naturally couldn't appear out of thin air. This was just like how first-tier heavenly venerates wouldn't be able to extract the unique power of other dimensions. After losing their source of power, they would slowly grow weaker and weaker. Even though second-tier heavenly venerates would only be suppressed to the first tier, this was still relying on the fact that they could extract some fundamental power. At the end of the day, they still needed a source of power. Ling Han continued to cultivate in seclusion, and he became increasingly interested in the origins of spiritual qi. As he deduced the heavenly venerable seals, he continued to ponder the origin of spiritual qi. Doing two things at once indeed affected his efficiency. However, it wasn't by very much. Another 400 million years passed, and Ling Han finally made a discovery. Chapter 3067 Facing Hysteria Head-On. Chapter 3067 3067 Facing Hysteria Head-On. 3067 Facing Hysteria Head-On. Where did spiritual chi come from? The answer to this question was surprisingly simple: the void, and fundamental power. The dimensions would interact with the void, extracting fundamental power and accumulating it in their cores. The dimensions would then channel this power, and as if becoming alive, they would eject this power in another form, spiritual chi. Thus, even though fundamental power and spiritual chi were different, there was indeed some relationship between them. Everything is related to the void and intimately related to the boundless power in the void. In this sense, the unique powers of the dimensions can also be viewed as belonging to fundamental power. They've simply undergone a transformation in the dimensions. That being the case, the eighth type of power is still fundamentally a power of dimension and a fundamental power. It's just that it's countless times more powerful. My body can be viewed as a Genesis world, so will that allow me to create another void? After all, this is the origin of all power. Or can I perhaps accommodate the void directly? Ling Han was slightly stunned by his own delusional ideas. Even Hysteria only dared to engulf the Genesis world, and not the void. The void was far too large, and no being had ever been able to reach the edges of this plane. It wouldn't be surprising even if 1,000 or 10,000 Genesis worlds existed in the void. Forget about this. I should focus my effort on elevating the dimensions in my body to high-tier, high-level dimensions. Only by doing this will I possess the power to genuinely rival Hysteria. I also need to find extermination as well. She's still in possession of a secret code of life. However, obtaining this secret code of life will be useless if I don't have enough dimensions in my body. Ling Han exited seclusion once to check on the cultivation of his friends and relatives. Those who had advanced to the heavenly Venerable tier before made almost no progress. The higher one's cultivation level, the longer it would take one to make any progress. Of course, this was unless they came across some rare opportunity. Meanwhile, the boundless resources provided to the Ling clan enabled the new emergence of tens of thousands of celestial kings. Right now, the Ling clan could completely be regarded as the #1 clan in the world. Even the established clans of the 7th tier elites couldn't compare to it. However, the members of the Ling clan still kept a relatively low profile because of the threat from extermination. "Where's Wang Qianhe?" Ling Han asked. "That brat," Ling Jianxue said with a strange expression. "His fortune is truly unimaginable. His cultivation talent is clearly nothing special, yet he's somehow able to encounter rare opportunities one after another. After all these years, he's already advanced to the heavenly Venerable tier." Even Ling Han was astonished. Compared to his children and his grandchildren, he honestly hadn't put too much effort into raising Wang Qianhe. Yet Wang Qianhe was still able to become a heavenly venerate? This was truly remarkable. Even though Ling Han could kill a 6th tier elite with a single finger now, he was still unable to help a 9th heaven celestial king advance to the heavenly venerable tier. This was something beyond the regulations, something that pertained to fundamental power. Wang Qianhe's cultivation talent was nothing special, and in order to let him exact revenge as soon as possible, Ling Han further hadn't attempted to stabilize his cultivation foundations. That being the case, it should have been difficult for him to even become a celestial king, so how had he suddenly become a heavenly venerate? Was he truly this fortunate? Ling Han frowned and said, "That brat has vicious tendencies, and he might even blame us for his clan being massacred. Keep an eye on him, and don't let him cause any trouble." "All right, I understand," Ling Jianxue replied with a nod. Ling Han continued to cultivate in seclusion. Another 5 billion years passed, and he had already managed to deduce all of the 4th grade and 3rd grade heavenly venerable seals. This allowed his cultivation speed to increase by countless folds again. Most of my dimensions have already been elevated to high-tier high-level dimensions, and I'm countless times more powerful than when I last battled against Hysteria. And add to that the explosive power of the 3rd grade heavenly venerable seals, and I should be powerful enough to rival Hysteria now. Let me take a look at the realm battlefield first. I need to make sure that Shatter Mountains and the others are working hard. In addition to that, I also want to find out about extermination's current situation. Ling Han exited seclusion and headed toward the realm battlefield. He went to the secondary battlefield first, and after so many years, the mother trees had naturally recovered their numbers already. They gave birth to a relentless enemy army, leading to huge casualties for the defenses. Ling Han directly charged into Hysteria's realm and wantonly destroyed everything in his path. Only after doing this did he casually leave and enter the main battlefield. To his disappointment, however, Chong Yan and the others had already fled. Not only had the 5 of them fled, but even Golden Silk Moth and 10,000 Shadows were nowhere to be seen. Only Lin Luo and the 6 other heavenly venerates remained to painfully defend against the enemy invasion. However, Hysteria was far too powerful, and a simple swing of its tentacle would immediately send the heavenly venerates flying. They were almost completely unable to slow down Hysteria's advance. The main battlefield was rapidly falling to enemy advance. If this continued, the main battlefield would only be able to hold on for a maximum of a few billion more years. After that, the profound negative realm would become a scrumptious meal for Hysteria. Ling Han released a battle cry before charging over and swinging his fists. Whoosh! He was extremely quick, and he transformed into a streak of light as he charged at Hysteria. Boom! A terrifying shock wave blasted into the surroundings as his fist collided with Hysteria. Pun pun pun! Lin Luo and the others were sent flying back like puppets. Fortunately, the bodies of 7th tier elites were indestructible, so they didn't suffer any wounds. Ling Han! They exclaimed in unison. What did they just see? Ling Han had swung a fist and forcefully blocked one of Hysteria's attacks. Gasp! There was someone in the world who could actually rival Hysteria. Even more unfathomable than this was the fact that Ling Han was only at the 6th tier. 6th tier? Good heavens! Just how devastatingly powerful would he become when he advanced to the 7th tier? However, Ling Han knew that the biggest benefit of him advancing to the 7th tier would be his body becoming indestructible and him gaining the ability to raise the dimensions in his body to the transcendent level. As for strength? In reality, he wouldn't become much more powerful in the short term. This was because the greatest source of his power was the powers of dimension, something that wouldn't rise in level simply because he advanced to the 7th tier. Instead, this was something that he needed to spend a long time cultivating and nurturing. Thank you for all your hard work, seniors, Ling Han said. He was radiating with an indomitable spirit as he continued. From today onward, we'll turn defense into offense and drive Hysteria out from this realm. If it had been someone else saying this, their words would have been treated as nothing more than a joke. Now, however, Ling Han's incredible feat of blocking Hysteria's attack gave them no option but to trust him. He had the right to utter such words. Charge! The heavenly venerates roared with renewed vigor. They had defended this place for so many years, and at long last, they had finally waited until the arrival of someone who could turn the tables. Ling Han! Hysteria shrieked using its high-pitched spiritual waves. It was filled with rage and regret. After failing to kill Ling Han last time, it understood that it had lost its final chance to wipe this person from the face of the world. Sure enough, Ling Han was charging over again, and he was now powerful enough to face it head-on. Hysteria, the era belonging to you has already come to an end, Ling Han bellowed as he unleashed another powerful attack. The 7 ultimate elites assisted him from the sidelines. Even though they were far weaker than Hysteria, they were still 7th tier elites, after all, so they could ultimately still provide a little help. In any case, they were indestructible and undying, so they could completely be used as human punching bags. Chapter 3068 3068 A Stunning Turn of Events. Chapter 3068 3068 A Stunning Turn of Events. 3068 A Stunning Turn of Events. Boom! 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 Ling Han was undoubtedly the main force in the battle against Hysteria. Piss off! He roared as his body lit up. He channeled all of his 3rd-grade heavenly venerable seals, causing his power to increase 6,000-fold. Even Hysteria was unable to withstand his furious attack, and its tentacle was forcefully sent flying. When Ling Han finished unleashing his explosive power, Hysteria had already been pushed back 350,000 kilometers. The 7 ultimate elites were all beside themselves with excitement. After fighting Hysteria for so many years, it had only ever been them who had been forced to retreat by Hysteria. They had never once managed to hold their ground. But now, they were pushing Hysteria back. This was the first time in history. This caused them to shake with excitement, so much so that even their heads went numb. 7th-tier heavenly venerates were also people. They also had emotions. Ling Han channeled his 4th-grade heavenly venerable seals. Even though his power increase fell down to only 5,000-fold, this was still enough for him to ferociously charge forward and continuously force Hysteria back. This time, Hysteria was forced to retread 250,000 kilometers. Ling Han then channeled his 5th-grade heavenly venerable seals. The combination seals all started to circulate together, smashing into Hysteria and forcing it to retreat more than 1 million kilometers. This was a stunning feat, a historical feat. After unleashing his explosive power, Ling Han stood still and asked in a calm voice, "Still want to continue?" Hysteria waved its tentacles around. Its situation was unique, and the fact that it had transformed into a dimension allowed it to become far more powerful than normal. However, this also caused it to lose some abilities, such as channeling heavenly venerable seals. Before today, this hadn't been an issue at all. One could only channel heavenly venerable seals for a limited amount of time, and it further took a great deal of time for one to recharge the energy of the seals. Meanwhile, Hysteria possessed a crushing advantage over the 7th-tier heavenly venerates, so it didn't matter even if it couldn't channel heavenly venerable seals. Now, however, Ling Han's raw power was already able to rival it. That being the case, it became extremely critical whether it could channel heavenly venerable seals or not. If this continued, it would be pushed back time and time again, all the way until it was forced from the 2-realm battlefield. At that time, it would be Ling Han who charged into its dimension, preventing it from waging another war against the transcendent dimension. "Impossible! You can't be this powerful!" Hysteria roared in a booming voice. "Unless you obtained the secret of the world." Secret of the world? Secret code of life? Ling Han's heart jolted. The world's core was most likely a non-existent manner. This was something that, extermination, had made up to trick him, Chongyan, and the others. Now, however, Hysteria was mentioning some secret of the world. Ling Han's unfathomable power came from the ball of light in his mind. Theoretically speaking, this was a secret that could never be discovered. One could never discover the ball of light in their own mind. In fact, one could only discover it if they managed to resonate with another person. In other words, it was essentially impossible. However, due to a string of coincidences, Ling Han had indeed discovered this secret and unlocked this ability. "Yes, that's definitely the case," Hysteria exclaimed, its emotions fluctuating and agitated. "Who would have thought? After planning for countless years, it was actually snatched away by you first. Is this so-called secret of the world the mysterious ball of light in one's mind?" Ling Han asked. "That's right. This ball of light contains the secret of the Genesis world's origin, and obtaining it will allow me to charge through the barrier and leap out of this small pond," Hysteria replied. Lin Luo and the others couldn't help but feel astonished upon hearing this. Leap out of this small pond? What did this mean? What lies beyond this small pond? Ling Han asked. He recalled the time when Hysteria had disdainfully called him a frog at the bottom of a well. This caused his mind to wander, and he speculated whether more Genesis worlds lay in the void. Now that Hysteria was actively mentioning it, Ling Han naturally had to seize the opportunity to ask. Otherwise, it would be much harder to extract this information from Hysteria when it eventually calmed down. "Perhaps it's a bigger world, or perhaps it's a vast expanse of void," Hysteria replied. "Even Hysteria doesn't know?" Ling Han smiled and asked. "You're willing to destroy the Genesis world for the sake of this unknown? So what if I am?" Hysteria replied unsympathetically. Since I know there's a chance for a more spectacular world to lie beyond this small pond, why would I want to be trapped in this place forever? Even if it's nothing more than a dark cage, how can I be willing to give up if I don't at least take a look for myself? Ling Han fully understood the situation now. Hysteria was naturally engulfing the dimensions to increase its own power. At the same time, however, it was also aiming to engulf those who had a ball of light in their minds. Once Hysteria engulfed these beings, the secrets that were contained inside the balls of light would also be obtained by it. After so many years, it was very likely that Hysteria had already obtained some secret codes of life. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to create sixth-tier monsters. However, Hysteria also had its own limitations. After transforming into a dimension, its base power was indeed much higher than anyone else. However, this also restricted it from creating any more dimensions. Instead, it could only continue to strengthen its own dimension. Qualitatively speaking, this kind of growth was superior to that of anything else. However, Ling Han could completely rely on an advantage in quantity to suppress or even surpass this. Hysteria was unable to rival Ling Han even after toiling for so many years. This was only normal. After all, becoming a dimension had indeed strengthened Hysteria. At the same time, however, it had also placed a pair of shackles on it, preventing it from moving around as it pleased. Meanwhile, Ling Han was truly blessed by fortune, first encountering Wally and then taking in a disciple who was similar to himself. This allowed him to finally discover the secrets of his own body, secrets that should have never been revealed. Everyone should have curiosity in their minds. However, I can't allow countless people to die simply to satisfy your thirst for an answer to your curiosity, Ling Han announced. He dashed forward and started to pummel Hysteria again. In the past, he had always been suppressed and pushed back by Hysteria. This had caused him to be filled with frustration. Now, it was finally his turn to return the favor. He ferociously launched an attack. However, without the explosive power of the heavenly Venerable seals, he was in fact unable to suppress Hysteria. Even with the help of Lin Luo and the others, he was only able to reach a stalemate with Hysteria. After all, Hysteria was far too powerful. Every once in a while, however, when the heavenly Venerable seals finished recharging, Ling Han would be able to unleash explosive power and forcefully push Hysteria back. Even though this was a slow process, Lin Luo and the other ultimate elites were still filled with uncontrollable excitement. This was because if this continued, there would eventually come a day when Hysteria was finally ejected from the profound negative realm. At that time, they would only need to stand guard at the entrance, and never need to worry about Hysteria invading them again. Ha! In the midst of their intense battle, Ling Han, Lin Luo, and the others suddenly felt several powerful auras rapidly dashing over. In the next moment, Chong Yen and the 4 other ultimate elites from the previous era appeared before them. Beside them were 10,000 shadows and the other 7th-tier heavenly venerates. Had they come over to provide help, now that victory was within reach? Were they doing this to leave a good name for themselves in the history books? They were truly skilled at taking advantage of the situation. However, before they could even finish these thoughts, they saw the 7 ultimate elites furiously charge over, their targets being Lin Luo and the others. Pun. This was a completely unexpected turn of events, and Lin Luo and the others were immediately sent flying after being caught off guard. Fortunately, those at the 7th tier were indestructible and undying. Thus, they were uninjured even though they were sent flying. Chong Yan, Golden Silk Moth, have you two gone crazy? Xian Fu roared in a harsh voice. What in the world were they doing? Were they helping Hysteria? Chong Yan and the others didn't answer. Instead, they continued to unleash attacks to draw the attention of Lin Luo and the others. However, Ling Han was the main force among them, so Hysteria would have no option but to retreat as long as he continued to unleash the might of his heavenly Venerable seals. This would remain the case even with the additional annoyance of Chong Yen and the others. Boom! A supremely powerful aura swept over them, after which a slender and elegant figure materialized. It was as if they had strode over from the ancient past, and they brought with them a devastating power as they launched a strike at Ling Han. Extermination. Chapter 3069 3069 Two enemies joining forces. Chapter 3069 3069 Two enemies joining forces. 3069 Two enemies joining forces. The true body of extermination, the being who had obliterated the Genesis world of the previous era. Now, some unknown persons will have taken control of this body and unleashed a devastating power. This was a power far beyond the peak stage of the 7th tier. In fact, this was a power that could almost rival Hysteria's. Whoosh! Hysteria also launched an attack at the same time, swinging a tentacle at Ling Han. Ling Han threw a fist to meet their attacks. Boom! His body shuddered, and he retreated 1,500 kilometers. However, Hysteria and Extermination didn't fare any better, with Hysteria's tentacles sent flying and Extermination also sent soaring through the air. What's going on? The two beasts are actually joining forces? Ling Han proudly stood in the sky and peered down at Hysteria and Extermination. He then stared at Extermination and asked, "The 7 of them were coaxed here by you?" Extermination also stood in the sky, with her clothes fluttering in the gusts of energy. She was breathtakingly beautiful. So what if they were? And so what if they weren't? She retorted. Ling Han shook his head and remarked, "I'm truly becoming more and more confused. You people are actually trying to protect Hysteria? What, have you all gone stupid as well?" Extermination looked at Ling Han and said disdainfully, "It's impossible to have a meaningful conversation with someone as ignorant as yourself." Ling Han roared with laughter and replied, "I can suppress 7th tier elites while at the 6th tier, so do you have any right to look down on me? Where is your courage coming from? Do you really think you can stop me? I can already rival you now, so it's only a matter of a few billion years before I can suppress all of you with a single hand. You might be growing more powerful, but are we not also growing more powerful?" Extermination sneered. Indeed, Extermination had been equally as powerful as Ling Han back then, and she was still equally as powerful as him now, even though he had already advanced in leaps and bounds. Perhaps Extermination's speed of advance could truly catch up to Ling Han's. "By the looks of it, you obtained many secrets from me at that time," Ling Han said. During his time in the central region of the Genesis world of the last era, he had been invaded by the world's will. Even though this had given him the ability to develop new dimensions, it was now clear that many of his secrets had been exposed to his opponent as well. Theoretically speaking, Extermination shouldn't have been able to replicate his footsteps even after learning of his secrets. This was because he had completed all of his foundations while still at the pseudo-heavenly Venerable tier. Yet, Extermination had surprisingly managed to grow stronger at an incredible pace. Hang on. As long as one obtains the ability to develop new dimensions, they'll be able to slowly manifest new dimensions even if they only started off with one. Given enough time, won't they also be able to reach the same level as the Genesis world? And just how powerful was Extermination to begin with? However, she most likely hadn't transformed into a dimension, so how was she able to suppress 7th tier ultimate elites as well? Perhaps she had also followed the same path as Ling Han, and gathered the power of countless dimensions while still at the pseudo-heavenly Venerable tier? And this had allowed her to manifest the embryo of a Genesis world in her body. Perhaps her abilities hadn't been as insane as Ling Han's back then, and she had only possessed 100 or 200 dimensions. After obtaining the secret of nurturing new dimensions from Ling Han, however, a new door to power had been opened up for her. "It's a shame that I wasn't able to obtain all of your secrets," Extermination said with a sigh. "Otherwise, would I have left you alive until today?" Ling Han finally understood why the world's will had told him to join forces with Extermination at that time. It had said that this was the only way for them to defeat Hysteria. In reality, it was trying to convince Ling Han to reveal his hidden secrets to Extermination. However, Extermination had been forced to compete with Ling Han for the sake of the secret codes of life, and this had allowed Ling Han to discover some clues and guess the true identity of the world's will. It was none other than Extermination herself. Otherwise, Ling Han still had yet to reach the 5th tier at that time, and it would have been useless even if he had reached the 5th tier. He would have been completely unable to rival Extermination, even after taking into account his ability to travel through dimensions. It was extremely likely that Extermination could have seized an opportunity to kill him. After all, Extermination was far more powerful than Chong Yen and the others. "What's this got to do with Hysteria?" Ling Han asked. "Why should I tell you?" Extermination replied coldly. Whoosh! Hysteria swung a tentacle and charged over. Even though it was confused as to why its predecessor was helping it, was there any reason not to take advantage of this situation? "I'll stop him. You do what you have to do," Extermination said as she engaged in an intense battle with Ling Han. She was truly no weaker than Ling Han. Not only was her power immense, but she could even channel heavenly venerable seals. She was much like a second Ling Han, one that could entirely rival him. Everyone with a battle prowess at the 7th tier was engaged now, meaning that there was no one left to stop Hysteria. Boom! Hysteria seized this opportunity to counterattack, furiously attacking cities and engulfing land. In just a day's time, it reclaimed all of the lands that it had lost to Ling Han. With no 7th tier ultimate elite to stop him, it continued to charge forward at an increasing speed. Ling Han ignored Extermination and charged at Hysteria. However, Extermination immediately caught up to him again. The two of them were at a similar power level, so either of them could easily run away from the other. Just Extermination alone was able to stop Ling Han. Of course, the inverse was also true, and Ling Han could also stop Extermination. In any case, the prerequisite to all this was the fact that Hysteria was powerful enough. Otherwise, if it were someone like Chong Yen, Ling Han could send them flying to heaven knew where with a single strike. Hysteria was indeed slightly affected by Ling Han's attacks. However, this was still nowhere enough to stop its advance. "Ling Han, abandon your futile struggles and welcome the arrival of a glorious age," Extermination said. Her battle with Ling Han was genuinely meaningless. He couldn't wound her, and she couldn't wound him, either. Neither of them was able to gain an advantage over the other. Thus, Extermination was clearly unwilling to engage in this battle any longer. Even if she wanted to kill Ling Han, it wouldn't be right now. "Humph! Allowing Hysteria to engulf the Genesis world is your so-called glorious age?" Ling Han retorted coldly. "Have you forgotten what I told you before?" Extermination asked with a proud voice. "The 8th type of power is antithesis. After comprehensive destruction, what will follow is a flourishing world filled with even more life and vitality. What kind of new life will the destruction of the Genesis world bring?" Ling Han questioned calmly. "Such pathetic sympathy!" Extermination scoffed in a cold voice. "After reaching our level, is there still any need to care about those ants? Ling Han, we can join forces to break out of this small pond." "No need," Ling Han replied in rejection. "Then drown in the furious tides of time," Extermination said. She continued to engage with Ling Han, preventing him from charging over to obstruct Hysteria. The other ultimate elites were also fighting with each other, and this was yet another similarly meaningless battle. None of them suffered any wounds, and none of them were even shedding a single drop of blood. Only Hysteria continued to furiously advance. Ling Han furrowed his brows. With Extermination and the others stopping them, they would have no way of breaking free to stop Hysteria. What could they do? "Leave!" he suddenly exclaimed, using his divine sense to deliver this message. If this continued, the end result could only be them looking on helplessly as Hysteria engulfed the Genesis world bit by bit. If they left now, however, Ling Han would at least still have the opportunity to cultivate and grow stronger. Moreover, if they didn't do anything about this, it wouldn't be long before Hysteria reached the profound negative realm, where Ling Han and Lin Luo's friends and families were located. Thus, their best option right now was to retreat. Lin Luo and the others were all 7th tier heavenly venerates, people who understood when to advance and when to retreat. They made up their minds in a split second, and they immediately dashed over to gather with Ling Han. Chapter 3070 3070 Retreat. Chapter 3070 3070 Retreat. 3070 Retreat. Ling Han and the 7 ultimate elites retreated. Extermination and the others didn't give chase. They were all at the 7th tier, and they were all indestructible and undying, so what difference would it make even if they caught up? They simply needed to guarantee that Hysteria could continue to advance. When Ling Han and the others retreated from the main battlefield, the elites fighting on the secondary battlefield also flew over. They had no option but to do so. Following the fall of the main battlefield, Hysteria continued to charge forward and move on to the secondary battlefield. Thus, how could these ordinary heavenly venerates stop the charge of a transcendent dimension? They naturally had no option but to retreat. The last time they had performed a full-scale retreat was when Hysteria had triggered a devastating storm of energy. Now, less than 1 epoch later, they were forced to perform another full-scale retreat. Just what was going on? Hadn't Ling Han joined the battle already? Why were they still being forced to retreat? Lin Luo revealed the reason, and this instantly caused deep astonishment and puzzlement to appear on everyone's faces. What was extermination trying to do? In any case, it was somewhat understandable that extermination was joining forces with Hysteria. After all, one of them was the past life, and one of them was the present life. Extermination's body had developed a new consciousness, and it wouldn't be surprising if this new consciousness had been affected by her old one. However, what had gotten into Chong Yan and the others? They had come from the Genesis world of the last era, so they clearly understood the fundamental nature of extermination and Hysteria. That being the case, why were they still willing to join forces with them? No one was able to understand this. In the end, they could only explain it by saying that Chong Yan and the others had been bewitched. The problem was, they were indestructible and undying 7th-tier heavenly venerates, so how could they possibly be bewitched? Retreat first, Ling Han commanded. There was already no way to turn the tables now, especially since there were 2 supreme 7th-tier ultimate elites on Hysteria's side. Meanwhile, he was the only one on their side. In terms of ordinary 7th-tier ultimate elites, both sides had the same number. That being the case, how could they possibly block Hysteria? This was unless more 7th-tier elites rushed over to help them. Even then, they would only be able to slow Hysteria down by a little. Everyone fell back in retreat. Judging by the situation, it was inevitable that Hysteria would engulf the profound negative realm. How quickly it did so was entirely dependent on how quickly it could engulf things. And after Hysteria engulfed this transcendent dimension, how would Ling Han still be able to block it? They needed to pack their things and make some necessary preparations. That way, they would be able to immediately retreat when they were faced with insurmountable danger again. Ling Han parted ways with Lin Luo and the others. They all had their own families, so they naturally needed to find a safe place for them first. Only after this could they discuss their next steps. They needed to decide whether they would defend the profound negative realm or retreat to the next realm. Ling Han mulled over this as he walked. The first question was why Chong Yan and the others had defected to Hysteria. Since 7th-tier elites were indestructible and undying, this naturally couldn't be because they were afraid of death. Instead, Hysteria had definitely promised them some benefits. However, what benefits could they receive from doing this? The answer most likely lay in the world's core that extermination had made up. Ling Han didn't believe it, but this didn't mean that Chong Yan and the others didn't believe it. They had most likely been told that they could advance to the 8th tier after obtaining the world's core. In addition to this, they had probably been enticed by the idea of breaking out of this small pond as well. These 7th-tier elites, people standing at the pinnacle of the world, were presumably very attracted to this idea. This was especially the case since they had already battled against extermination for so long before this. Would they not feel exhausted both physically and mentally after all this time? After arriving in this new Genesis world, they no longer had any friends or family to take care of or share time with. There was nothing for them to feel attached to. At the same time, many 7th-tier elites also viewed all matter beneath them as nothing more than mere ants. That being the case, it was no surprise that they joined forces with Hysteria. Perhaps there was one additional reason on top of all this. That was, they had suffered great humiliation at the hands of Ling Han, so they wanted to borrow Hysteria's power to exact revenge. Forget about it. These 7 people were only minor characters in the scheme of things, so it wasn't important why they had decided to defect to Hysteria. When the time came, Ling Han would simply suppress them with a single hand. The most critical factor was extermination. What was her true identity? After obtaining the secret of manifesting new dimensions from him, her battle prowess had been allowed to grow to a terrifying level. Moreover, she was intent on jumping out of this so-called small pond. Hang on! Ling Han's eyes suddenly lit up. If extermination is genuinely the same as me, then her being at the 7th tier should allow her to elevate a dimension to the transcendent level as well. At that time, she would possess enough power to suppress me. However, this didn't happen. Extermination is at the 7th tier, and she's also someone who's lived for heaven knows how many years. Being as freakish as she is, she most likely possesses no fewer heavenly venerable seals than me, either. She was further in possession of a group of dimensions before, so her cultivation speed is definitely no lower than mine as well. So, she's in possession of a transcendent dimension, yet she was still only able to rival me, but not surpass me. What does this signify? She definitely possesses fewer dimensions than me. In other words, she didn't obtain the ability to manifest new dimensions. The glimmer in Ling Han's eyes grew brighter and brighter. If his speculation was correct, then extermination's ability to rival him was because she possessed a transcendent dimension inside her. In other words, she had a qualitative advantage over him. However, once Ling Han advanced to the 7th tier, he would also be able to raise a dimension inside him to the transcendent level. Or he could choose to raise more dimensions into high-tier high-level dimensions. In any case, he could definitely regain his advantage. This is definitely the case. Otherwise, it will genuinely be impossible to stop Hysteria. He returned to his ancestral grounds, and those under the heavenly venerable tier were all drawn into the celestial guest residence by him. This was a heavenly venerate tool, and the space inside it was so large that it could rival a low-level dimension. As for the Empress, Hunyo, the karmic life heavenly venerable, and the others, they all sat around Ling Han as they listened to him explain the situation. They were heavenly venerates, so it wouldn't be too difficult for them to flee and stay alive as long as they didn't directly challenge Hysteria or experience the comprehensive collapse of the Genesis world. What? They were shocked and petrified by what Ling Han told them. If news of this got out, it would definitely cause immense commotion to sweep throughout the entire Genesis world. It would cause everyone to freeze with fear, feeling as if doomsday were about to arrive. The karmic life heavenly venerable frowned, and asked, "Why are they doing this?" "This isn't important anymore," he replied. "The most important thing is how we can stop these bastards." Everyone nodded in agreement. What would it matter even if they understood the reason behind Chong Yen and the others' betrayal? Could that change the current situation? Ling Han pondered for a moment, and said, "I'll discuss this with Lin Luo and the others first. In fact, I've already drawn all of my clan members into the celestial guest residence already, so you guys may as well come along with me as well." Before coming here, he had already agreed with Lin Luo and the others to meet up at the ancestral grounds of the Lin clan after dealing with his personal matters. Even though there was no one left to obstruct Hysteria, it was a dimension, after all, so it could only engulf the land bit by bit. Thus, the profound negative realm was safe for the moment. However, this period of safety might only last for 1 billion years. Or perhaps it would even be as short as 100 million years. Ling Han led the others to the Lin clan. Xian Fu and Bai Fan had already arrived, and Zhou Heng and Chu Hao were naturally present as well since they were Lin Luo's disciples, and their ancestral grounds were also right next to each other's. They were only waiting on Wu Jihong and Blood Rainbow. After waiting for a dozen or so days, the 2 remaining 7th-tier heavenly venerates finally arrived. The 8 most powerful men in the world sat down, surrounded by their disciples and descendants, all of them heavenly venerates. They quietly listened to the discussion of the 8 ultimate elites. In light of our current situation, what suggestions does everyone have? Lin Luo asked. He was the owner of this ancestral ground, so he was naturally playing host to this meeting as well. Those bastards! Bai Fan cursed as he slammed the table. His formidable aura seeped out, causing the heavenly venerates in the surroundings to become pale. They felt agonizing pain on their skin, and it was as if they were about to explode. Chapter 3071 Discussion. Chapter 3071 3071 Discussion. 3071 Discussion. Chom Yen and the 4 others are from the Genesis world of the last era. After their world collapsed, and after slumbering for so many years, it's understandable that their way of thinking has changed, though this doesn't make them any more deserving of forgiveness. However, 10,000 shadows and golden silk moth? Humph! There was an intense look in Blood Rainbow's eyes, and his body was brimming with killing intent. 10,000 shadows was only able to advance to the 7th tier thanks to the core fragments that we gave him, yet he's actually chosen to betray us now? Unforgivable! Xian Fu also spat with anger and ferocity in his eyes. They were so furious that they wanted to kill someone. However, this wish was nothing more than a pipe dream. 7th tier elites were undying, and this was the case even though 10,000 shadows and golden silk moth had only just advanced to this tier, and were far weaker than the others. Lin Luo waved his hand, and said, "Since this has already become reality, talking about it any more won't be of any help to us. What we need now is a plan to deal with the situation. This is the last transcendent dimension in the Genesis world, so we definitely have to defend it no matter the cost. Otherwise, everything will be done for," Wu Jihong opined. Linghan shook his head, and said, "We won't be able to defend it." Blood Rainbow frowned, and said, "Don't ruin our morale." "It's the truth," Linghan replied. He had dared to challenge 7th tier elites while still at the 5th tier, so he was naturally even more unafraid of 7th tier elites now. However, they were all on the same side, so his attitude was naturally more amiable. If we exclude Hysteria, the number of 7th tier elites in the enemy camp is coincidentally equal to ours. Moreover, their battle prowess is also very similar to ours. So, if we decide to battle them one-on-one, there'll obviously be no one left to stop Hysteria. The ultimate elites all fell silent. Speaking boldly was easy, but they couldn't choose to ignore this grim reality. Xian Fu turned to Linghan and asked, "Then what do you suggest we do?" Linghan pondered for a brief moment before replying, 1. Wait, and 2. Retreat. What did this mean? Everyone looked at Linghan. They had no option but to admit that he had already become the backbone of the Genesis world. It's impossible for us to defend the profound negative realm, Linghan explained. Since that's the case, our best option is to wait. We'll wait until Hysteria engulfs this dimension, and we'll pull the chestnut out of the fire at that time. We'll snatch the core of the dimension from under its nose. If we succeed, then Brother Xian, Brother Wu, Brother Bai, and Miss Lin will all have an opportunity to advance to the 7th tier. If they become 7th tier elites, then they'll also become indestructible, even if their battle prowess doesn't increase immediately. In any case, that will give them the right to face Hysteria. Even if it's only 4 of them, they'll at least be able to slow Hysteria down a little. In addition to this, we can continue to retreat, all the way to a low-level dimension. We'll allow Hysteria to engulf all the other dimensions. This will buy us more time. Linghan paused for a moment before continuing. I still have a lot of room for improvement. I haven't even reached the peak stage of the 6th tier yet. The so-called peak stage of the 6th tier that he talked about wasn't referring to the 5 fundamental powers inside him reaching a consummate level. Instead, he was referring to the dimensions inside him elevating to a higher level. Everyone grimaced upon hearing this. Linghan's battle prowess had been growing at a breakneck pace. From initially struggling to suppress an elite at the peak stage of the 7th tier, he had advanced to being able to suppress 5 ultimate elites by himself. A short while ago, he had even been able to rival Hysteria and force it to retreat. All of this was done by a 6th-tier elite. With such incredible feats to his name, it wouldn't be surprising even if someone claimed that he was a 7th-tier or 8th-tier elite. However, he actually had yet to reach the peak stage of the 6th tier. Just how astonishing was this? Ling Han looked at everyone and said, "We can get a move on now. Relocate everyone in the medium-level dimensions and try to move them all to the low-level dimensions. In fact, we can directly move everyone to the celestial realm that sits at the very end. We'll engage in a final battle with Hysteria there." This was far too bold and decisive, no? Retreating to the very end, to a place with no more room for retreat in a single step. How resolute! The 7 ultimate elites exchanged glances before falling deep in thought. If they retreated to the celestial realm, they would genuinely have nowhere left to retreat after that. They wouldn't even have the power to blow up the Genesis world to drag Hysteria down with them. That's impossible now, Ling Han said with a shake of his head. Since Hysteria has already fallen victim to this before, it definitely won't fall victim to it a second time. Everyone was disappointed upon hearing this. However, the 7 ultimate elites slowly nodded in agreement. They wouldn't fall at the same hurdle twice, either, so it was only natural that Hysteria was the same. In fact, Hysteria had potentially transformed into a dimension to avoid being attacked upon the destruction of the Genesis world. Its dimension was far too large, so it was indeed possible for it to avoid this calamity if it hid itself in some corner of the dimension. Very well. I accept your proposal, Lin Luo said, becoming the first ultimate elite to nod his head in approval. I also accept it, Zhou Heng said with a nod. Accepted, Chu Hao said, becoming the third person to vote. Xian Fu and the 3 others hesitated for a brief moment before eventually nodding slowly. Since Ling Han could still grow stronger, they might as well go all in on him. Since we've come to a consensus, let's get a move on now. Don't waste any time, Lin Luo said. They didn't ask anyone else for their opinion. If one weren't at the 7th tier, one wouldn't have the right to discuss these things with the ultimate elites. 7th tier heavenly venerates were gods among the heavenly venerates. Ling Han traveled through the dimensions and relocated all the important people to the celestial realm first. He couldn't help but feel slightly emotional after returning to this familiar place. After traveling to so many places, was he ultimately going to resolve everything here? The other heavenly venerates naturally received news of the situation as well, so they all started to relocate to the celestial realm with their clans and families. To put it simply, everyone was trying their best to relocate as many people as they could. These were all living and feeling beings, so it was only natural that they wanted to save as many of them as possible. These people were all seeds of hope for the future. After resolving this potential worry, Ling Han entered seclusion and started to cultivate. The most important thing right now was his battle prowess. If he could wield a crushing power superior to that of his enemies, then he could naturally resolve all of the problems that they faced. Before entering seclusion, there was one matter that caused him to become slightly distracted. Wang Qianhe had disappeared. Ling Han couldn't find him no matter what, and it was as if he had simply vanished from the face of the world. It was as if he had never existed in the first place. However, he was a powerful heavenly venerate who was more than capable of protecting himself, and he was also a shockingly fortunate person who always came across rare opportunities. Thus, he most likely wouldn't face any danger. Ling Han pondered this for a short moment before waving away his worries for this descendant. He officially entered seclusion. He aroused all of the heavenly venerable seals inside him, and used them to interact with the void, extracting a vast amount of fundamental power to temper his body. Meanwhile, his dimensions also started to develop with vigor, actively drawing energy from the void by themselves. They then transformed this energy into nutrients that could help them grow. Since these dimensions contained life force now, would it be possible for him to place living beings inside? Ling Han was contemplating the worst-case scenario where they failed to stop Hysteria. At that time, he would transform himself into a Genesis world to hold all living beings. Let's hope we never reach that stage. With this in mind, Ling Han decided to give it a test. He drew the Empress and the others into a dimension in his cell. The result was a success. Ling Han breathed a sigh of relief. This meant that as long as he remained alive and undestroyed, those he cared about would also be able to stay safe forever. He focused his attention on cultivation. It was already a foregone conclusion that the profound negative realm would be destroyed by Hysteria. That being the case, they definitely had to snatch the core of the dimension, as this would allow them to nurture several more 7th-tier elites. Moreover, this might also allow Ling Han to elevate his cultivation and reach the peak stage of the 6th tier. Time, what he needed was time. Time flew by, and 600 million years passed in the blink of an eye. One day, Ling Han received news that the profound negative realm had almost completely been engulfed by Hysteria already. The core of the dimension was about to appear. Time to set off. Ling Han, Lin Luo, and the other 7th-tier heavenly venerates arrived at the profound negative realm. Right now, this transcendent dimension was already unable to live up to its name. It was so small that it could only compare to a small city. Chapter 3072 Fight for the Core. Chapter 3072 Fight for the Core. 3072 Fight for the Core. Only 8 people were part of the team that traveled to the profound negative realm. There was Ling Han, Lin Luo, and the 6 other ultimate elites. Others wouldn't be of any help even if they tagged along. Apart from Hysteria, their enemy was fully made up of 7th-tier ultimate elites such as Chong Yan and the others. These people were far too powerful. Nothing more needed to be said about extermination, while Chong Yan and the others had obtained the dimensions that once belonged to Feng Wuding. This allowed their battle prowess to increase by a significant amount. Someone with a battle prowess under the 7th tier participating in this battle would be nothing more than seeking death. "Heh, sure enough, you people came," Extermination remarked as she proudly stood in the sky. Gusts of energy blew past, causing her sleeves to billow in the air and her raven hair to flutter in the wind. This caused her skin to appear even whiter and more delicate. She was a stunning beauty, yet she was also someone who could dictate the fate of the Genesis world of 2 separate eras. "We're not allowed to come?" Ling Han retorted calmly. "It's meaningless even if you do come," Extermination replied in a similarly calm and nonchalant voice. It was as if she weren't worried about Ling Han at all. It was difficult to say whether this reflected her true feelings, but it at the very least gave her an advantage in terms of aura. Ling Han smiled and asked, "And just who do you think you are? It's meaningless just because you say so? We have to scurry back home just because you told us to? Since you've already come, there's no need to think about going home anymore. I'll suppress all of you here today," Extermination announced, with her raven hair fluttering in the wind. There was an indescribable beauty about her at this moment. She looked at Ling Han, and continued in a baleful voice. "As for you, I'll slowly grind away your cultivation before extracting all of your secrets." "Heh, in your dreams," Ling Han snickered. The core of the dimension had yet to appear, and the ultimate elites on both sides were also undying people who were unable to kill each other. Thus, they didn't engage in battle right away. Instead, they threw insults at each other in an attempt to decrease their enemies' morale. Ling Han exchanged barbs with Extermination, while Lin Luo and the others exchanged barbs with Chong Yan and the other traitors. 10,000 shadows, I'll definitely slice open your chest to see what color your heart is," Bai Fan shouted as he glowered at 10,000 shadows. His face was filled with fury. He was a short-tempered person, and he detested ungrateful bastards like 10,000 shadows the most. 10,000 shadows naturally paid no heed to this. He had already advanced to the 7th tier, so why would he still care about any of this? He simply needed to act as he pleased. He didn't need to care about what others thought of him. He was indestructible and undying, so what could they do about him? "Bai Fan, once I obtain the core of the dimension and advance to the peak stage of the 7th tier, just see how I dispose of you," he threatened calmly. Because of the length of time he had cultivated, his cultivation was indeed inferior to Bai Fan's right now. However, this wouldn't be the case once he advanced to the peak stage of the 7th tier. Perhaps there would still be a small difference in power between different heavenly venerates at the peak stage of the 7th tier. However, this difference definitely wouldn't be very big. The betrayal of Chong Yen and the others greatly angered Lin Luo and the other ultimate elites. Now that they were face to face again, their boiling anger naturally simmered to the fore. Initially, Ling Han's explosive increase in power had already allowed him to rival Hysteria and even push it back. In other words, he had already been powerful enough to eliminate the calamitous danger that Hysteria posed. Yet, the interference of extermination as well as Chong Yen and the others had thrown a spanner in the works, and instead caused the situation to become even direr. How could they not be furious? Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hysteria also appeared, brandishing its 9 tentacles and causing immense pressure to descend upon Ling Han and the others. The core of the dimension had yet to appear, yet everyone had already become tense and ready to explode at any moment. 1. A column of brilliant light materialized, radiating with 18 different colors. The core of the dimension had appeared. Whoosh! Hysteria was the first to move, with its tentacles shooting toward the core of the dimension. However, Ling Han immediately moved as well, throwing a punch and forcefully pushing Hysteria back. Lin Luo, Chong Yen, and the others also started to move, giving rise to a chaotic battle. Ling Han, with me present, you won't be able to achieve anything, Extermination said as she dashed over. Her hands were like a heaven-splitting axe as they slashed down at Ling Han. Humph! Piss off! Ling Han roared as he replied with a destructive punch. Pun! Extermination was immediately sent flying. What? Extermination exclaimed in shock. Ling Han's power was actually growing even faster than hers. Even though the difference wasn't big, he was indeed slightly more powerful than her now. She sighed in her mind. She had transformed into the world's will before, and she had pretended to help Ling Han obtain 2 new abilities. In reality, however, she had been secretly stealing his secrets. However, she had only learned how to elevate dimensions to the transcendent level, and she had failed to learn how to manifest new dimensions. There were a total of 10,000 dimensions inside her, and this was already a remarkable and terrifying number. At that time, all of these dimensions had further been high-tier high-level dimensions, equivalent to the power of 100,000 6th-tier elites. However, following the destruction of her previous body, all of these dimensions had suffered significant damage, with most of them directly collapsing. Meanwhile, the remaining ones were all severely damaged. This was also one of the main reasons why Hysteria had abandoned its old body and decided to start anew. Even though extermination was still domineering, there were only a few hundred dimensions remaining in her body. It was only because she had raised a few of them to the transcendent level that she was able to become so freakishly powerful. However, it was far too difficult to raise dimensions to the transcendent level. Moreover, she hadn't obtained as many secret codes of life as Ling Han, so this further caused the speed of her advance to slightly lag behind Ling Han's. Even though it was only by a tiny bit, this was still enough to give Ling Han an upper hand. Ling Han unleashed a battle cry as he unleashed increasingly ferocious attacks. Myriad transformations returned to 1. Extermination cried as she made a pushing motion with her jade-like palms. A chaotic burst of energy that was filled with disorder and turmoil attempted to refine the entire world into one. Ling Han humphed coldly and unleashed a furious punch at her. Who cared what techniques she used? He would crush them with absolute power. He was brimming with confidence and self-belief. Pun! Extermination was sent flying again. The difference in power between them was only minuscule, yet in a battle between ultimate elites, this minuscule difference was often extremely critical and decisive. Hysteria charged over to join forces with extermination and battle Ling Han. Ling Han was unafraid, and he unleashed another battle cry as he faced off against the 2 most powerful enemies in the world. He appeared extremely lively as he fought against them. Lin Luo and the others all watched on with emotion. Thank heavens they had resolutely defended Ling Han in the past. Otherwise, following Chong Yen and the others' betrayal, they would be powerless to do anything but be suppressed. They wouldn't have any hope of turning the tables. The two sides continued to battle. However, Hysteria and Extermination were both incredibly vicious beings who were only slightly weaker than Ling Han, so after joining forces, they slowly started to gain the upper hand. After obtaining more dimensions, Chong Yen and the other traders were also more powerful, and Lin Luo and the others now. Ling Han and his companions were suffering a full-scale disadvantage. What could they do? Ling Han bellowed and unleashed his full power as he charged at the core of the dimension. Now wasn't the time to engage in a life-or-death battle with Hysteria and the others. The core of the dimension was the most important thing. However, Hysteria and Extermination naturally wouldn't allow Ling Han to snatch the core of the dimension so easily. They both charged after him, unleashing a barrage of attacks as they did so. The three supremely powerful beings continued to unleash furious attacks at each other as they fought for the core of the dimension. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Meanwhile, the core of the dimension continued to whiz around in the air. The profound negative realm had yet to fully die, so it was as if the core of the dimension were a living person who was unwilling to be obtained by anyone. Pun! The three Paragon elites exchanged another blow, unleashing a shock wave so powerful that the core of the dimension was instantly shattered into pieces. 1. The shards of the core exploded in different directions. Hysteria and Extermination attempted to grab them, yet Ling Han suddenly unleashed an explosive roar, after which boundless radiance started to shine from his body. His power increased by a whopping 8,000-fold. First Grade Seals. Chapter 3073 3073 Secret of the World. Chapter 3073 3073 Secret of the World. 3073 Secret of the World. Ling Han hadn't just been cultivating for the past few 100 million years. He had also deduced all of the first-grade seals at the same time. He had skipped over the second-grade seals, and directly focused on deducing the first-grade seals instead. This was in order to maximize his battle prowess. However, he had never channeled these seals before, and this was because it would have been meaningless to do so. What would it have helped him even if he had suppressed Hysteria and Extermination and pummeled them into the ground? They were undying and indestructible beings, after all. Now that he was at a critical stage of fighting for the core of the dimension, however, he no longer needed to hold back anymore. Boom! Ling Han glowed with brilliance as his power increased 8,000-fold, and even the pumping of his blood was so loud that it was as if heaven and earth were shattering into pieces. He threw a single punch, and it was as if all other actions descended into stillness, with only his fist continuing to tear through the air and illuminate the sky. Pun pun! What did it matter that his opponent was Hysteria? What did it matter that his opponent was Extermination? They were powerless in the face of such an explosive attack, and they had no option but to be sent flying back. Ling Han then charged toward Chong Yen and the others, sending them flying into the distance as well. This freed up Lin Luo and the others, and allowed them to dash around to gather the core fragments of the dimension. Ling Han! Extermination howled in fury. In just an instant, more than half of the core fragments had already been collected by Lin Luo and the others. She was seething with rage, yet she didn't charge forward to attack Ling Han again. Instead, she dashed toward the core fragments of the dimension. Piss off! She roared, throwing a palm strike, and instantly blasting Xian Fu into the distance. This was an inevitable result as the gulf in power between them was far too great. She reached over again, and she quickly obtained a piece of the core fragment of the dimension. Elsewhere, Hysteria was also forcefully pushing its opponents aside, allowing it to obtain a piece of the core fragment. They were two of the most powerful beings in the world, after all, and apart from Ling Han, there was no one else who could rival their might. Ling Han looked around, and he saw that all of the core fragments had already been collected, with most of them falling into the hands of his allies. Seeing this, he roared, "Leave!" Lin Luo and the others left without any hesitation. They had come here with the goal of obtaining the core of the dimension, so since the core fragments had already been collected, what was the point of staying any longer? With Ling Han bringing up the rear, the 7 ultimate elites quickly retreated together. After Lin Luo and the others left, Ling Han stood guard at the two-realm passageway, and said calmly, "The next time we meet, only one party will make it out alive." Extermination and Hysteria stopped attacking him. Hysteria was unable to pursue Ling Han into different dimensions, while Extermination alone was slightly weaker than Ling Han. That being the case, why would she pursue him alone? To ask for a beating? Humph! Who doesn't know how to speak boldly and boast? Regarding who will die at that time, you'll naturally find out soon, Extermination said coldly. Ling Han turned around and left, paying no more heed to her. After returning to the celestial realm, Lin Luo and the others divided up the core fragments of the dimension. These were naturally given to Lin Yulian, Wu Haoyang, and the others. If they could advance to the 7th tier, they would naturally have a huge influence on the situation. Ling Han also received a few pieces of core fragments. He was the main force in the fight against Hysteria and Extermination, so having him increase his strength was naturally the most important. He thought for a moment and decided against immediately using these core fragments. Instead, he stowed them away. There was still a little bit of time left, so he wanted to rely on his own efforts to reach the peak stage of the 6th tier. At that time, he would then use these core fragments to help him advance to the 7th tier. Of course, the chance of success was incredibly low. After all, even a complete core of the dimension might not be enough to help him advance to the 7th tier. Ling Han composed himself and pushed all other thoughts out of his mind. Right now, what he had to do was cultivate and grow stronger. This was the key to resolving everything. Lin Yulian, Xian Chihu, and the others were also cultivating in seclusion and refining the core fragments of the dimension. Even if they were capable of advancing to the 7th tier, this wouldn't be any time soon. Instead, it would take them hundreds of millions of years. Lin Luo and the others had nothing to do, so they traveled to the front lines and attempted to obstruct Hysteria's advance. That way, they could buy some time for Ling Han and the others. However, Chong Yen and the others were no pushovers, so Lin Luo and the others were unable to give Hysteria any trouble. Following the fall of the profound negative realm, there were no more transcendent dimensions in Hysteria's path. In fact, there weren't even any high-level dimensions in its path. Thus, the speed at which Hysteria engulfed these dimensions soared explosively, and it only needed a short 1,000,000 years to engulf an entire dimension. Not only that, but the more dimensions Hysteria engulfed, the greater its speed would become. A few 100,000 years per dimension, 100,000 or so years for a dimension. When all of the medium-level dimensions were engulfed, Hysteria only needed tens of thousands of years to engulf an entire dimension. Fortunately, all of the heavenly venerates under the 7th tier were helping relocate the living beings of these dimensions. However, just how large was a dimension? There was only a limited number of heavenly venerates, so only less than 1% of living beings were actually moved to the celestial realm. 5 billion years later, Ling Han finally exited seclusion. He had already raised all of the dimensions inside him to high-tier high-level dimensions. Limited by his current cultivation level, this was already the highest he could raise them. He couldn't raise them to the transcendent level. At this moment, Bai Maifan, Lin Yulian, and the others also exited seclusion. Withstanding the huge pressure of expectations on them, they all successfully advanced to the 7th tier. Once they stabilized their cultivation, they would become extremely important helpers to Ling Han. Ling Han once again gathered Ning Haixin and the others, people who had a ball of light in their minds. Now that he had grown stronger, perhaps he would be able to discover more of the hidden secrets in these balls of light in their minds. This pertained to the secret origin of the Genesis world. This was the most valuable information in the world. They entered resonance using the balls of light in their minds again. Boom! Tumultuous waves crashed through their minds, causing Ning Haixin and the others to immediately lose consciousness. However, Ling Han was able to withstand this shock wave. In that short instant, he was able to observe many secrets. Why did Ning Haixin possess a powerful sense of affinity? Why was Ma Chenggao's divine sense so powerful? Why was Fei so skilled at comprehending formations? And why had Ling Han been so skilled in alchemy? He had been unreasonably skilled in alchemy. He could master any pill recipe immediately after learning it, and he could even create new pill recipes out of thin air. This was the secret code of the entire Genesis world. Before obtaining it, the secret codes of life had only been one part of the equation. Of course, they had been the most important part of the equation. Everything else could only be regarded as icing on the cake. Huge transformations started to take place inside Ling Han's body. Golden lotuses bloomed in his mind, with his comprehensions becoming as radiant as flowers. The secret codes of life that Ling Han had obtained all hovered to the surface. There were still some sections missing, yet these missing sections were automatically completing themselves at this moment, allowing the secret codes of life to form a ring. Ling Han could sense that he was resonating with people similar to him very far away. Moreover, he was resonating with more than one person: Extermination and Wang Chuanhe. It was as if they had all been linked together, through space and time, and were capable of drawing out the fundamental nature of the world. Ling Han wasn't sure whether Extermination had seen these secret codes of life or not. However, he felt like that short instant was far too little time for her to do so. He had been fully prepared, yet he had still almost missed the opportunity to observe them. Meanwhile, Extermination had been completely unprepared. As such, it was unlikely that she had seen these secret codes of life. Ling Han digested this ring of secret codes, and he felt like his body was now undergoing some sort of mysterious transformation. However, he was unable to describe what this transformation was. Time quietly crept by, and another 900 million years passed just like that. Ling Han was forcefully awakened from his seclusion. This was inevitable as Hysteria had already advanced to the foreign realm. Once the foreign realm fell, the celestial realm would be next. If Hysteria engulfed these final two dimensions, then it would succeed in its goal to engulf the entire Genesis world. Chapter 3074 Heavenly Venerable Seals, complete. Chapter 3074, 3074 Heavenly Venerable Seals, complete. 3074 Heavenly Venerable Seals, complete. The final battle was about to begin. Ling Han made some final preparations, doing his best to move as many people as he could into the dimensions inside him. The small celestial realm was already exploding with people. There were countless dimensions inside Ling Han, and they were all high-level dimensions that were capable of hosting 6th-tier heavenly venerates. Including the Empress, Hunyo, and the others, Ling Han decided to move all of them into his body. In this sense, no one could compare to Ling Han. Take Lin Luo, Zhou Heng, and the others, for example. They also had 1 or 2 dimensions inside them, and these dimensions had also been cultivated into high-tier high-level dimensions. However, they were unable to host life. Without a secret code of life, how could they possibly manifest life? Thus, only Ling Han was capable of doing this. Perhaps Extermination was capable of it too, since she had also obtained some secret codes of life. It was just that she hadn't obtained as many as Ling Han. A while later, everyone under the 7th tier had already been moved into Ling Han's body. It was as if he had transformed into a Genesis world. In the outside world, only a measly few 7th tier ultimate elites remained. They included Lin Luo, Xian Fu, Wu Jihong, Bai Fan, and Blood Rainbow, the 5 experienced 7th tier heavenly venerates. In addition to them, there were also Zhou Heng, Chu Hao, Lin Youlian, Wu Haoyang, Xian Chihu, and Bai Maifan, the 6 newly advanced 7th tier heavenly venerates. All up, there were 11 7th tier heavenly venerates present. Including Ling Han, this was their final formation in the ultimate battle against Hysteria. The foreign realm was falling at a rapid pace. After engulfing almost all of the Genesis world, Hysteria had already become incredibly powerful at this moment. It was advancing at an insane speed, using only a measly 300 years to engulf the entire foreign realm. This was nothing more than a low-level dimension, so it was already unable to raise Hysteria's power by much. However, engulfing the entire Genesis world was a complete process that involved engulfing all of the dimensions, regardless of how powerful or weak they were. Hysteria couldn't give up on these dimensions simply because they were too weak. Otherwise, the process would be incomplete. Ling Han was still cultivating. Before this, he had been fully focused on investigating secrets of the Genesis world, such as the secret codes of life. Thus, he still had yet to fully deduce the second-grade heavenly Venerable seals. Since he had spare time now, he decided to sit cross-legged and absorb the comprehensions in his mind. He had already obtained all of the secrets of the Genesis world, so with this as a foundation, deducing the heavenly Venerable seals became as easy as could be. In any case, this was simply a process of interacting with the fundamental power of the Genesis world. In just 3 years, Ling Han opened his eyes again, revealing the dense array of symbols within them. He was clearly sitting right there, yet Lin Luo and the others suddenly felt as if he were distant and unreachable. It was as if Ling Han had entered another realm. 1. With a single thought, 9 streams of symbols appeared on Ling Han's body. These were all of the heavenly Venerable seals, from 9th grade seals all the way to 1st grade seals. Not a single one was missing. Each seal was resonating with the others, and even though they were releasing energy, they were also absorbing energy at the same time. This was an endless cycle of growth and rejuvenation. This was a perfect cycle, a complete system. Ling Han came to some sort of understanding, and another thought in his mind caused the 9 streams of symbols to fuse together again, transforming into a yin-yang diagram. Yin-yang, life, death, positive, and negative, these things were opposing, yet they were also mutually enabling. Ling Han tore open the void and casually snapped his fingers. Pung! A huge explosion instantly tore through the void, unleashing a petrifying destructive power. This was the result of his power increasing 100,000-fold. By channeling all of the heavenly Venerable seals and fusing them together, Ling Han was surprisingly able to increase his power 100,000-fold. Pooh! Ling Han immediately spat a mouthful of blood. This power was far too immense, so much so that it placed a huge burden on Ling Han's body. His 6th-tier physique was actually unable to withstand it. Nearby, Lin Luo and the others were all wide-eyed with shock. The destructive power of this attack had been far too terrifying. Even they couldn't help but feel stunned. Would they genuinely be killed if they were struck by such an attack? Perhaps their physical body would remain unharmed, but their mind would most likely be shattered into pieces. Yet, Ling Han was still only at the 6th tier. How did he possess such unfathomable potential? However, it was incredibly difficult for Ling Han to unleash such an attack. After all, his body had yet to become indestructible, so he was still unable to withstand the flow of such immense power. Ling Han, how do you feel? Everyone asked. There was annoyance on Ling Han's face. He hadn't imagined that the problem wasn't his power being insufficient, but instead his physique being too weak to withstand the shock. Fortunately, the dimensions inside him all radiated with powerful life force. In just an instant, his slightly cracked skin had already healed and become as flawless as new. Heavenly venerates were detested by heaven and earth, so it was only natural that they wouldn't be nurtured by heaven and earth. However, the dimensions inside Ling Han were also his cells at the same time. They were a part of him, so why wouldn't they nurture him? Unleashing such an attack indeed put a significant burden on his body. However, as long as it wasn't too frequent, this was a burden that he could withstand. It's time for the final battle, Xian Fu announced. With his sharp sense as a 7th-tier ultimate elite, he could already sense an overwhelming aura charging over and exuding an indescribably powerful might. That was Hysteria, a being that had engulfed almost the entirety of the Genesis world. No one could imagine just how powerful it had become now. Pung! The earth shuddered, and the initially clear sky instantly became pitch black. Thankfully, they were all heavenly venerates, so they could see clearly even in absolute darkness. Countless tentacles descended from the sky, bearing down on the entire celestial realm. Hysteria had come. It wanted to engulf the final dimension and achieve its ultimate aim. This was the celestial realm, the realm where Ling Han had begun his journey. And now, it was going to become the final battleground. This was where everything had begun, and this was where everything would end. Charge! Ling Han and the others all charged forward, directly tearing open the void and leaping out of the dimension. Looking down from the void, they could see an indescribably large octopus reaching out with its countless tentacles and encircling the entire celestial realm. To provide a sense of scale, Hysteria was like a large mountain, while the celestial realm was nothing more than a small blade of grass on the mountain. Ling Han and the others naturally wouldn't stand there idly. They all charged forward and unleashed a barrage of furious attacks at Hysteria, attempting to stop it from engulfing the celestial realm. Huh! Why don't you guys obediently shrink back into your shells like before? Wouldn't that be nice? Extermination said. She appeared before them with Chong Yen and the others. She swept her gaze over them, and she discovered that there were 4 new helpers in Lin Yolien and the others. She couldn't help but smile, and said, "Oh, so you've found yourself some new helpers. No wonder you dared to come over to challenge us. However, it's not only you who has new helpers." She turned around and said, "Come on out." 1. A figure walked over from extremely far away, radiating with a heaven-suppressing aura as he did so. This was a 7th-tier Ultimate Elite. Another 7th-tier Ultimate Elite had appeared in the world? However, disbelief and deep astonishment spread across Ling Han's face when he saw the appearance of this person. Wang Qianhe. This newly advanced 7th-tier Ultimate Elite was actually Wang Qianhe. How was this possible? To say nothing else, just how many years had passed? How was it possible to raise someone from the heavenly body tier to the 7th-tier heavenly venerable tier in such a short span of time? Moreover, Wang Qianhe's cultivation talent could only be regarded as normal. If he were to cultivate by himself, it would be extremely difficult for him to even become a celestial king, to say nothing of becoming a heavenly venerate, a 7th-tier heavenly venerate. Now, however, Wang Qianhe was standing right before them, radiating with the formidable aura of a 7th-tier Ultimate Elite. This was the reality. Chapter 3075 Beginning of the Final Battle. Chapter 3075 Beginning of the Final Battle. 3075 Beginning of the Final Battle. Are you surprised? Extermination asked as she looked at Ling Han. There was an eerie smile on her face. Indeed, Ling Han replied with a nod. He looked at Wang Qianhe, his descendant across many generations. Back then, Ling Han had already had a vague feeling that he was perhaps releasing a sinister demon into the wild. However, Wang Qianhe had been far too weak, so Ling Han had simply told Ling Jianxue to keep an eye on him, pushing him back onto the right track whenever he strayed. The problem was, Wang Qianhe's fortune was far too freakish, so much so that he was able to soar to the heavenly venerable tier in spite of his mediocre talent and unstable cultivation. After Wang Qianhe reached the heavenly venerable tier, it would naturally be far more difficult to keep an eye on him. Thus, he had suddenly disappeared into thin air one day. However, Ling Han still hadn't imagined that Wang Qianhe would one day appear before him as a 7th-tier Ultimate Elite. Not only that, but he was also standing on the side of extermination and hysteria. Why? By doing this, are you still able to keep a clear conscience? Ling Han asked. There's already no one else I care for in this world. Wang Qianhe replied coldly. Since that's the case, so what if it's destroyed? Moreover, you were clearly the most powerful heavenly venerate at that time, yet you failed to travel around to look for your descendants. It was your actions that led to the destruction of the Wang clan. He paused for a moment, and an intense glimmer appeared in his eyes, revealing his uncontrollable rage. Let me ask you, are you able to keep a clear conscience? This person was far too extreme. It's not too late to turn around and repent, Ling Han said in a solemn voice. Otherwise, I won't show any mercy. Ha ha! My body is indestructible. So how are you going to suppress me? Wang Qianhe sneered coldly. He surprisingly took the initiative and charged at Ling Han. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He launched 3 palm strikes in quick succession, with each strike carrying his full 7th-tier power. These were incredibly powerful attacks. However, could ordinary 7th-tier Ultimate Elites phase Ling Han now? He simply replied with a casual tap of his finger, easily blocking all of Wang Qianhe's attacks. However, with Wang Qianhe holding him back, could Lin Luo and the others stop Hysteria? Clearly not. Even though they had 4 more 7th-tier elites than before, Extermination was able to easily block all of them by herself. Enjoyed the show. This is something that only 7th-tier elites have the honor to watch, Extermination said with loud laughter. It was as if she had become one with the void. Ling Han! Lin Luo and the others exclaimed. I'll go! Bai Meifan roared as he charged over, attempting to block Wang Qianhe for Ling Han. That way, he could free their most powerful main force in Ling Han. However, would Extermination allow this? She launched a strike with her slender hand. Pun! A cloud of blood instantly exploded from Bai Meifan's body. Everyone was stunned upon seeing this. 7th-tier ultimate elites were undying and indestructible. Yet Bai Meifan was bleeding after facing a single strike? How could they not feel numb with shock? Did 7th-tier elites ultimately have to face death as well? Ling Han's pupils contracted. Sure enough, Extermination's battle prowess had also increased in leaps and bounds. She had most likely cultivated another dimension to the transcendent level, which allowed her power to increase explosively. It was because of this that she could wound 7th-tier elites with a single strike. He couldn't waste his time on Wang Qianhe anymore. Otherwise, to say nothing of stopping Hysteria, all of his companions would be killed by Extermination. Freeze! Ling Han commanded as he made a tapping motion at Wang Qianhe. A devastating restrictive power crashed down, forcefully pushing the groaning Wang Qianhe into the ground. With a roar, Ling Han then charged at Extermination. Come! Extermination cried as she charged over to meet Ling Han. Pun! The two of them exchanged a blow, causing their clothes to violently billow amid the void windstorms that were countless times more powerful than energy shock waves. The windstorms rapidly permeated into the surroundings. Lin Luo, Chong Yen, and the others were all sent flying upon being struck by this storm. They were completely unable to withstand it. They were all at the 7th tier, yet the gulf between them was clearly immense. I'll deal with her. You guys go over to stop Hysteria, Ling Han said. Understood. Lin Luo and the others replied as they charged at Hysteria. Chong Yen and the others tried to stop them, yet being fewer in number, they were naturally unable to fully stop Chong Yen and the others. Several attacks instantly slammed into Hysteria. However, Hysteria didn't react at all, and it simply extended its tentacles to tightly wrap around the celestial realm. It had grown several times more powerful again. The attacks of 7th-tier elites had been unable to wound it in the past, so this was further the case right now. The attacks were completely unable to affect it at all. At this moment, Hysteria was only a single step away from achieving its dream. Once it engulfed this realm, it would be able to replace the Genesis world. At that time, it would be able to do as it pleased. Thus, did it need to pay any heed to these measly insects? Ling Han frowned and immediately charged at Hysteria. Hey, your opponent is me! Extermination said as she lashed out in an attempt to stop Ling Han. Piss off! Ling Han roared. He unleashed a punch, and a single symbol lit up on his forehead. An intensely cold chill gripped at Extermination's heart, and she surprisingly felt an immense sense of fear so powerful that she almost didn't dare to face this strike. However, she immediately composed herself, and replied with a punch on her own. They were both the most powerful beings in the world, so what was there for her to be afraid of? Pun! Ling Han's punch struck Extermination head-on, instantly causing her to grunt in pain. She retreated rapidly, with blood furiously pouring from her mouth. What? She was unable to accept this. Not only had her full power strike failed to rival Ling Han, but she had even been wounded. Ling Han's punch had been far too terrifying. Ling Han retracted his fist, with blood also seeping from the skin all over his body. Just then, he activated all of his heavenly venerable seals and increased his power 100,000-fold. However, this had also placed a huge burden on his body. In any case, he was indeed able to wound even Extermination after unleashing this powerful trump card. Ling Han turned around and charged at Hysteria. Pun! He threw a punch, and a powerful energy wave gathered on his fist. The further his fist traveled, the more layers this energy wave would gain. It was as if the void were being compressed by him and smashing toward Hysteria along with his fist. This strike was far too terrifying. Hysteria roared upon being struck, and it immediately retracted all of its tentacles like an ordinary mortal pulling their hand back from an open flame. Hysteria was colossal as it lay in the void, and it brandished its countless tentacles around as it glared at Ling Han with its huge eyes. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hundreds of tentacles slammed over. Ling Han swung his fist to block these attacks. Pun, pun, pun! Each swing of his fist was able to send a tentacle flying. His movements were insanely quick, and after throwing several thousand punches, Hysteria finally stopped attacking him with its tentacles. This was because its tentacles were pulsating with light in an extremely unstable manner. It had been wounded during their fierce exchanges. Ling Han was also drenched in blood. He had channeled his supreme combination seal, so each attack had caused him to suffer some light wounds. With all the light wounds combined together, this was naturally no longer a light wound. However, what could he do? If he didn't unleash this power, how could he possibly force Hysteria to retreat? Ling Han, you're truly full of surprises, Extermination said as she slowly strolled over in the void. However, you can't stop this inevitable trend of the time. Boom! Hysteria and Extermination joined forces to unleash frenzied attacks at Ling Han. To make the impossible possible, and to defy the will of the heavens. This is what it means to be a cultivator! Ling Han roared as he charged over to face their attacks. The final battle officially began. Chapter 3076 3076 Death. Chapter 3076, 3076 Death. 3076 Death. The battle between Ling Han, Hysteria, and Extermination had already transcended the level of ordinary 7th-tier elites. This wasn't a battle that Lin Luo, Chong Yen, and the others could interfere in. Even though Hysteria and Extermination were theoretically nothing more than ordinary 7th-tier elites, with Ling Han further being only a 6th-tier elite, they were still far more powerful than the other ultimate elites at the peak stage of the 7th tier. Ling Han fought fiercely with his enemies. He was incredibly powerful, and grasping all of the heavenly Venerable seals, his explosive power could genuinely be viewed as unfathomably terrifying. In fact, it was possible that he could damage, or even obliterate the body of a 7th-tier heavenly Venerate with a single strike. However, Hysteria and Extermination were also unimaginably powerful. After blocking most of the power from his strikes, their indestructible physiques were more than capable of withstanding the remaining power. In contrast to them, Ling Han was only at the 6th tier, so his physique was his glaring weakness. As the battle dragged on, this glaring weakness also became more and more obvious. He was covered in blood, and even his meridians were starting to become chaotic. It was as if they were about to explode. Ling Han, the arrival of a new age is inevitable, yet you still insist on going against the flow. This can only result in death, Extermination said with loud laughter. Even though she was being pushed back with Hysteria, neither of them had suffered any genuine wounds to speak of. Instead, it was Ling Han who was becoming increasingly wounded. This would eventually lead to his demise. Why don't you embrace this new age? Ling Han roared with laughter and chided. What bullsh**t new age? I'll crush them all. Foolish! Extermination spat with an ice-cold expression. If that's your choice, then you can go and die now. The two supremely powerful beings unleashed a barrage of relentless attacks at Ling Han, forcing him to unleash his full strength. They didn't give him any chance to recover, and they forced him to hurt himself more and more. If this continued, whether for a dozen years or 100 years, Ling Han would eventually succumb to his own self-inflicted wounds. Lin Luo and the others naturally understood the situation. They were all extremely worried, yet this wasn't a battle that they could interfere in. If they charged over, being sent flying would be the least of their worries. It was even possible that they might be crushed into smithereens. Ha ha! Chong Yen and the others were filled with delight. They had all been bullied by Ling Han before, and the 5 ultimate elites from the previous generation had all experienced suppression at his hands. Meanwhile, Golden Silk Moth had almost become Ling Han's servant. As for 10,000 Shadows, he would immediately flee whenever he saw Ling Han. These were all humiliating memories. Now that Ling Han was in such a miserable state, they were naturally feeling as delighted and satisfied as could be. This little brat is finally facing his reckoning. Humph! We've already let him live for so long, so it is indeed time for us to end his pathetic life. Shut your traps! Bai Myfin bellowed in anger. He unleashed an attack at the traitorous 7th-tier elites. However, their strength was similar, and 7th-tier elites were also unable to wound fellow 7th-tier elites. Thus, Chong Yen and the others wouldn't be affected even if they didn't try to block this attack. However, 7th-tier elites naturally cared about their face. After all, who wanted to be sent flying for no reason? Thus, Chong Yen and the others all decided to counterattack. An intense battle broke out among them again. Ling Han was also aware of his current situation. If this continued, it would only be a matter of time before he was inevitably ripped apart by the devastating power surging within him. However, he definitely couldn't die. Otherwise, everyone in the dimensions inside him would die as well. So, what could he do? Retreat? And allow Hysteria to engulf the celestial realm? No. Ling Han shook his head in his mind. There was only one option left. He retrieved several core fragments of the dimension and pressed them to his chest, immediately starting to refine them. These were the core fragments of the profound negative realm, and he hadn't used them this entire time. He had saved them up for this exact moment, the moment when he attempted to break through to the 7th tier. Right now, he needed the physique of a 7th tier elite. This was the decisive moment. Could he sense the 6th type of fundamental power while facing such immense pressure? If he could, and if he managed to extract a wisp to temper his body, then he could immediately obtain an indestructible 7th tier physique. At that time, the burden that caused his skin to crack and blood to seep from his mouth would be nothing more than a mere tickle. At that time, hysteria and extermination would no longer be a threat. Not only that, but he would also be able to cultivate his dimensions to the transcendent level. This would allow him to grow more and more powerful, to a stage where hysteria and extermination would have no option but to be suppressed by him. Come, let me take a gamble. Ling Han refined the core fragments of the dimension. This was because dimensions naturally extracted fundamental power from the void as well before transforming it into something that they could use. Moreover, this fundamental power was extracted and transformed through the cores of the dimensions. Thus, refining the core of a dimension would allow one to lay eyes on the fundamental power of the Genesis world. More importantly, Ling Han was far too powerful, and this severely inhibited him from detecting the last fundamental power of the Genesis world. Moreover, these were only core fragments of the dimension, and not a complete core of the dimension, so the power they contained would definitely be far inferior in comparison. Thus, everything was reliant on Ling Han being able to withstand this immense pressure. Come! 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 Ling Han roared in his mind. His follicles opened up, and he attempted to detect that last remaining fundamental power. Hysteria and extermination naturally noticed this, so they both increased the speed and ferocity of their attacks in an attempt to distract Ling Han and prevent him from advancing to the 7th tier. Boom! Boom! The battle between them was intense, and Ling Han continued to vomit large mouthfuls of blood. This wasn't as a result of being wounded by hysteria or extermination, but instead as a result of unleashing his supremely powerful attacks. His wounds became increasingly severe, and his recovery speed was unable to keep up with them, even though the dimensions inside him were brimming with powerful life force. A cruel smile tugged at the corners of Extermination's mouth, and she murmured, "Die! Hurry up and die already! I can't wait to swallow your body and obtain all of your secrets." Ling Han didn't reply. Instead, he fought against them with his full power. 1 day, 3 days, 10 days. This was far longer than what hysteria and extermination had expected. Ling Han had actually managed to hold on for so long. However, His situation was also becoming increasingly dire. His willpower was simply terrifying. "It all ends here," Extermination sneered coldly. Her attacks became even more ferocious. Pun! Clouds of blood exploded from Ling Han's body, after which he was no longer able to defend himself. Would Hysteria and Extermination go easy on him because of this? No! They would naturally seize this opportunity to kill him once and for all. Their attacks furiously slammed into Ling Han, whose body had yet to become undying and indestructible. Thus, they could genuinely kill him if they managed to breach his defenses. Boom, boom, boom! Boundless energy windstorms erupted, with the two formidable beings frenzied as they attacked Ling Han. This was utterly terrifying. Lin Luo, Chong Yen, and the others were unable to see clearly through the wild storms of energy. However, they understood that Ling Han was most likely facing a perilous situation with little hope of recovery. After all, he was only at the 6th tier, so it was inevitable that he would be crushed to death once his defenses were breached. Lin Luo and the others were filled with panic. However, to say nothing of the fact that they were being obstructed by Chong Yen and his ilk, what could they do even if they charged over? Could they stop Hysteria and Extermination? Any one of them would be able to severely wound, or even kill them. What could they do? Was this the end? Was it already impossible to rectify the situation? Hysteria and Extermination finally ceased their attacks. The energy windstorms also started to slowly dissipate. When the void stabilized again, what they saw was Ling Han hovering in the void, with his limbs hanging by his side and his body drowned in blood. Was he dead? The expressions of Lin Luo and the others changed drastically. They could no longer sense any life force from Ling Han. Everything was truly done for. Ha ha! Meanwhile, Chong Yen and the others all chortled with laughter. They had already waited far too long for this day. Extermination suddenly turned around. Just then, she had already been walking over to kill Lin Luo and the others. Hysteria also stopped in its tracks. It had initially been slithering over to engulf the celestial realm. Hovering in the void, Ling Han's finger moved ever so slightly. Chapter 3077 3077 7th Tier. Chapter 3077 3077 7th Tier. 3077 7th Tier. Ling Han! Lin Luo and the others exclaimed. They were all filled with delight. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly erupted from Ling Han's body, and it was as if torrential waves were crashing into the surroundings. This brat didn't die! Not only that, but he even advanced to the 7th tier! Extermination muttered in disbelief. Her raven hair danced wildly in the wind, reflecting the disorderly emotions in her mind. How is this possible? He had suffered severe self-inflicted wounds and shattered his own defenses, after which he had been furiously attacked by two of the most powerful 7th-tier ultimate elites in the world. Moreover, he didn't possess the indestructible body of a 7th-tier elite, so he should have been killed as comprehensively as could be. I've yet to obliterate you people, so how can I die so easily? Ling Han said as he suddenly stood up straight. He was still drenched in blood, and he was still riddled with wounds. At this moment, however, he was filled with soaring spirit and energy. How is this possible? Extermination spat through gritted teeth. She couldn't accept this reality. Being attacked by her and Hysteria was no joke. This wasn't something that one could overcome through grit and determination alone. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "Don't you two know? The more pressure I'm under, the more motivation I feel." It was in that moment of life or death that he had borrowed the power of the core fragment to initiate communication with the 6th type of fundamental power. Even though he had only extracted a wisp of this fundamental power, it had been enough to elevate his physique to a state of indestructibility. Add to that the overwhelming powers of dimension inside him, and he was naturally able to withstand the frenzied attacks of the two supremely powerful beings. His strength was almost identical to before, yet his physique had finally reached a state of indestructibility. This signified that he had no more weaknesses. He was flawless. "Come, let me show you true strength!" Ling Han said with loud laughter. He actively charged at Hysteria and Extermination, swinging his fists and unleashing a barrage of wild attacks. Pung! It was only one strike, yet Extermination was already sent flying. Another strike, and Hysteria's colossal body was sent flying as well. It was as if Hysteria were a giant toy being tossed through the air. After advancing to the 7th tier, Ling Han's power was now unrivaled, and his physique was now indestructible. This was a most perfect form. Hysteria and Extermination bellowed in fury as they charged back over. However, against this peerless man, they could do nothing but grit their teeth and endure punishment. In reality, this was quite similar to before. Ling Han attacked, while the two of them defended. In the past, however, Ling Han would suffer self-inflicted wounds while he attacked them. Moreover, these wounds would increase in severity until he eventually shattered his own defenses. But now, Ling Han had already resolved this problem. His body was now invincible, and he no longer needed to worry about wounding himself from the huge burden. What can we do? It was now Hysteria and Extermination's turn to feel worried. Now that Ling Han had advanced to the 7th tier, it signified that there was still more room for his battle prowess to grow. All he needed was some time. In other words, Hysteria and Extermination would remain at the same level, while Ling Han would gradually grow stronger and stronger as he fought. If this continued, there would eventually come a day when they were defeated, suppressed, or even killed. Hysteria became truly wild at this moment, swinging its tentacles in a crazy manner and acting as if it wanted to suppress Ling Han. However, what use would this be? You block him first! Extermination suddenly said to Hysteria using her divine sense. With a flash, she rapidly retreated from the battlefield. Ling Han frowned slightly. However, only Hysteria was capable of swallowing the celestial realm, so it was this monster that he needed to pay the most attention to. He didn't need to pay much attention to the others. Once he disposed of Hysteria, the catastrophic threat lingering over the Genesis world would also be swept away. At that time, Extermination wouldn't be able to do anything regardless of how powerful she was. One had to realize that the Genesis world was also filled with life and vitality. Even though there was only a single dimension remaining, this dimension could still slowly manifest new dimensions, eventually leading to a flourishing situation just like before. He continued to pummel Hysteria. Just his raw power alone was already enough to rival Hysteria, or perhaps even suppress it. Now that his power had increased 100,000-fold, just how devastating was the situation. Hysteria was instantly forced to scramble back and retreat. Without Extermination helping it, it was completely unable to block Ling Han's attacks. Ling Han gave chase, and was just about to suppress Hysteria. However, he suddenly felt a dull pain in his chest, and his attack immediately skewed to the side and missed its target. What's going on? Wasn't he an invincible 7th tier elite? So why was he still feeling pain in his chest? Ling Han didn't give this much thought, and he threw another punch at Hysteria. However, he felt another burst of pain in his chest, a pain so uncomfortable that he could barely control himself. This was definitely no coincidence. Ling Han swept his gaze over the surroundings. This was definitely related to Extermination. Otherwise, she wouldn't have left the battlefield for no reason. Looking for me? Extermination asked. Using her formidable power, she could rapidly send her words to anywhere in the void. She walked over, holding someone in her hand. Wang Qianhe. He had already been suppressed by Ling Han just then. Regardless, he wouldn't have been able to rival Extermination even if he were at his peak state. Ling Han's pupils contracted. Perhaps the pain in his chest was related to Wang Qianhe? Extermination, what are you doing? Wang Qianhe howled in fury. If I hadn't wanted to use you as a backup plan, would I have raised you with all my effort and even destroyed a dimension to help you advance to the 7th tier? Extermination sneered. It's time for you to show your worth now. What? It was because Extermination had destroyed one of her dimensions that Wang Qianhe was able to advance to the 7th tier. Since these were dimensions, they naturally had dimension cores as well. Moreover, Extermination possessed transcendent dimensions inside her, so bestowing Wang Qianhe with a dimension core from one of these dimensions was indeed enough to raise him to the 7th tier. One had to realize that a transcendent dimension was equivalent to at least 10 7th tier elites. Thus, paying such a huge price to raise a single 7th tier elite could be regarded as extremely extravagant. Extermination was no charitable person either, so why had she decided to help Wang Qianhe? This is called the blood murder technique, Extermination explained calmly. As long as two people share the same bloodline, this technique will allow me to wound one person and therefore wound the other person at the same time. However, if the target is too powerful, the person being wounded by the technique also needs to be powerful enough. So that's why I helped him advance to the 7th tier. Extermination smiled, and continued. I initially thought that this was an unnecessary plan, one that needlessly caused me to lose a significant amount of my battle prowess. Now, however, it looks like I was very correct to take such extreme measures. Linghan, you truly can't be underestimated. As she said this, she stabbed her fingers into Wang Qianhe's chest. This was extremely uncanny, and Linghan immediately felt a piercing pain in his chest as well. It was as if his heart were about to explode. Gasp! This blood murder technique is truly powerful. Extermination, you'll definitely suffer a wretched death. Wang Qianhe roared. Shut up. Extermination ordered coldly. You should already count yourself lucky that a piece of trash like you was able to witness the secrets of the 7th tier. Did you really think I took a fancy to a useless fool like you? Linghan came to a sudden realization. No wonder Wang Qianhe had betrayed him so resolutely. As it turned out, part of the reason had been the feeling of affection between him and Extermination. Extermination was indeed a breathtaking beauty, and Wang Qianhe was also someone who had suffered a tragedy when it came to love. Thus, it wasn't strange that he had fallen for Extermination's purposeful seduction. Even though Linghan found this plan a little shameless, he couldn't help but admire Extermination for her resoluteness and farsightedness. She had sacrificed so much power and effort simply to raise a pawn that she most likely wouldn't need to use. Chapter 3078 Engulfing the World. Chapter 3078 Engulfing the World. 3078 Engulfing the World. To sacrifice a dimension, a transcendent level dimension. Even Linghan would be reluctant to do this if he only had a set number of dimensions. Extermination was truly a resolute and ruthless person. Ancestor, I was wrong! Wang Qianhe cried. He tried to unleash his 7th tier power to fight against Extermination, yet the gulf between them was far too great. Before Extermination, he was like a newborn chick standing in front of a vicious old eagle. He couldn't resist at all. Linghan wanted to charge over, yet Extermination simply launched a palm strike at Wang Qianhe. Linghan wildly vomited blood, and he was instantly stopped cold in his tracks. This so-called blood murder technique was definitely no ordinary secret technique. Instead, this was most likely a secret technique that pertained to the secret of the Genesis world. Linghan was powerless to do anything. Extermination had paid such a heavy price to gain this advantage, so how could it be something that was easy to resolve? Are you not going to hurry up and finish your job? Extermination roared at Hysteria. Hysteria glared at her for a moment. This was its body from the previous era, yet it couldn't help but feel extremely distant and unfamiliar with it at this moment. Just what kind of being was Hysteria? It was naturally ticked off at being ordered around like this. However, it still suppressed its anger. Once it engulfed the celestial realm, the power of the entire Genesis world would flow into its body. At that time, it would become the most powerful being in the world. It would be able to suppress and kill anyone it wanted. Very well, I'll let you enjoy your arrogance for a while longer. Hysteria flew toward the celestial realm. It had only formed a temporary alliance with Extermination, and it naturally wouldn't tolerate someone being more powerful than it, and ordering it around. Linghan wanted to stop Hysteria, yet he couldn't move his body at all. Extermination simply needed to strike Wang Qianhe, and this would immediately cause him to suffer severe wounds. His face was as white as a sheet. He was definitely more durable than Wang Qianhe, and he wouldn't be killed even if Wang Qianhe was killed by extermination. The problem was, extermination simply needed to obstruct him and give Hysteria enough time to engulf the final dimension. What about Lin Luo and the others? They were completely powerless to do anything. So, what could they do now? Even though Ling Han had already advanced to the 7th tier, gaining peerless power, he was still unable to prevent the worst-case scenario from playing out. Lin Luo and the others dearly wished that this was nothing more than a nightmare that they would wake up from. However, Hysteria had already wrapped its tentacles around the celestial realm, and started to engulf it again. With its insane speed, it would only need a maximum of 10 years to destroy the celestial realm. 10 years. Could Ling Han turn the tables in such a short amount of time? Looking at the current situation, Ling Han was completely suppressed by the blood murder technique and unable to break free. The key to everything was Wang Qianhe. Lin Luo and the others were all brimming with killing intent. If they could kill Wang Qianhe, then Ling Han would also be set free. Die! Lin Luo and the others charged at extermination. However, Chong Yan and the others were no pushovers, so with them in the way, only 4 of them managed to arrive before extermination. Here to seek death? Extermination asked in amusement as she unleashed a palm strike. Pa 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 pa! The 4 people were immediately sent flying, vomiting blood as they crashed through the air. Extermination was no match for Ling Han, yet she possessed an absolute advantage over the other 7th-tier elites. None of them could withstand a single strike from her. To say nothing to 4 7th-tier elites, even 10 7th-tier elites would make no difference if they charged up to her. Ha ha! Extermination roared with laughter. Her long hair billowed in the wind, and her slender body swayed slightly. She appeared as breathtaking and seductive as could be. Her victory was already set in stone. 1 month, 6 months, 12 months. Lin Luo and the others were powerless as they watched the celestial realm rapidly shrink piece by piece. Meanwhile, Hysteria was seemingly undergoing some kind of transformation as well. To gather the power of the entire Genesis world into one body. Just what kind of qualitative change would this lead to? Ling Han was still unable to stand up. Even though Wang Qianhe had already been dismembered by extermination, just how powerful was a 7th-tier elite's life force? Thus, he didn't die even though he had suffered such severe wounds. In fact, 7th-tier elites couldn't even commit suicide. 3 years, 5 years, 8 years. The celestial realm was already in its death throes. Meanwhile, the initially pitch-black Hysteria surprisingly started to transform as well. It first turned white, before turning silver, and then finally toward gold. It transformed slowly, and it was very likely that it would become completely golden once it finished engulfing the celestial realm. 9 years, 9 years and a half. The celestial realm was about to expose its core. It was also at this moment that Wang Qianhe was finally tortured to death by extermination. 7th-tier heavenly venerates were indeed undying, but this was also dependent on the situation. For example, Yellow Sand and the extermination's previous self had both been killed by the destructive power of the Genesis world of the previous era. Now that extermination's strength had also reached a similar level, it was only natural that she was able to kill a 7th-tier elite as well. Arg! Wang Qianhe wailed in agony as his soul floated out of his body, which had already been completely obliterated. Lin Luo and the others didn't feel a shred of sympathy. He had chosen this fate himself. After all, who told him to side with extermination and Hysteria? Scheming with sinister individuals would naturally lead to a wretched death. Now for the final strike! Extermination said as she jabbed her slender finger at Wang Qianhe's divine sense. Comparatively speaking, the divine senses of 7th-tier elites were far weaker than their physical bodies. Pa! Wang Qianhe's divine sense was instantly obliterated. He was as dead could be. Ah! Ling Han clasped his head in agony. Under the influence of the blood murder technique, it was as if a blade had been violently plunged into his divine sense. This caused a splitting pain to engulf his head. In the next instant, however, he had already dashed forward. His target was none other than Hysteria. He had to stop it. There was almost no time remaining. Now that Wang Qianhe had died, Ling Han had no time to worry about whether he should feel sympathy or apathy toward this extreme descendant. Ling Han charged over and threw a furious punch. Wang! Like waves in a pond, golden light rippled across Hysteria's body. The power of Ling Han's strike was completely dissipated over Hysteria's colossal body, reducing its destructive power by countless times. As such, it was completely unable to wound Hysteria. Meanwhile, Hysteria didn't waste any time as it continued to ravenously engulf the celestial realm. Ling Han roared and threw another punch. Pung! Extermination dashed over in a timely manner, blocking his strike with her palm. Even though she was sent flying, her interference still succeeded in blocking most of Ling Han's power. Hysteria faced this attack head-on as it watched the celestial realm collapse completely. The core of the dimension flew out, and it was as if it wanted to engage in a final struggle. However, the entire celestial realm was already surrounded by Hysteria, so how could the core of the dimension escape? Hysteria widened its maws and swallowed the core. Spit it out! Ling Han roared as he furiously attacked Hysteria. Pun pun pun! He unleashed countless attacks at this instant, causing Hysteria's golden body to shudder violently. Whoosh! Hysteria counterattacked, using a tentacle to whip Ling Han's fist. One! A devastating power rippled through the air, blasting Ling Han back. Meanwhile, Hysteria's tentacle also bounced back slightly. This exchange had ended in a draw. Gasp! After engulfing the final dimension and obtaining the power of the entire Genesis world, Hysteria's power had also grown to an unfathomable level. One had to realize that it was unable to channel the heavenly Venerable seals. It was only able to wield its raw power. Yet, it was still powerful enough to rival Ling Han, who had already increased his power 100,000-fold. Just how insanely powerful had it become? There was no dispute that it was the most powerful being in the world. Ha 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 ha! Hysteria roared with laughter. Its strength was still increasing, and the power of the Genesis world was still boundlessly gathering. This was an infinite power that made it feel as if everything was within its grasp. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.